Yep. Mhm. Hello. Hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing. Hello. Check 1, 2, 3. Testing. Hello. Hello. 1, 2, 3. Hello. 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 1, 2, 3. Hello. 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 1, 2, 3. Hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. Frequencies. 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 Check frequency. Hello. Check frequency. Hello. Frequency. Hello. 1, 2, 3. Check frequency. Hello. 1, 2, 3. Hello. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10. Hello. और हम जो है ना, हेलो, हाँ जी, जी बड़ी, हेलो, चेक 1, 2, 3, जी, जी। फोन साइलेंट से कर ले। ये गाना चल गया। मेरे को पता नहीं गाना चल गया।
करते रहेंगे। अभी बंद कर दूं मैं?
बंद करते हैं बात। यहाँ से अब दबा के रखेंगे ये।
Should I keep this off?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Push the button.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Nothing starts on time nga eh.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the session on addressing climate debt, transforming economic and financial systems to support a just energy transition. So before we move to our actual session, we're going to take a step back, go back in history, and look at the history of debt. Now, the earliest form of debt were recorded on clay tablets, and it was mostly agricultural debt that was given in as grain loans to farmers. But even the rulers of that time knew that excessive debt could destabilize the economy as well as social structures. And they came up with the concept of clean slates or debt forgiveness. So this concept of forgiveness of debt is not new. Then came the Industrial Revolution and colonization. So the colonial powers, when they went into their colonized territories, when they defaulted, so that gave them power over those territories, and because of their defaulting. So debt is not just a financial tool or an instrument, but it is a social and political relationship that defines power dynamics. And there is an invisible debt as well, in addition to the financial debt that we can quantify and see. And that invisible debt is the ecological debt, the resources of the earth that are finite and that we exploit, and we have been exploiting throughout the years. So that is the ecological and the environmental debt. So the concept of climate debt came into being or was peddled or was mainstreamed by NGOs and by the Global South when they realized two important things. One is that there's an emissions debt, and secondly, there's an adaptation debt. So what do these two terms mean? Firstly, the emission debt is that the global north has a historic responsibility. Because of their industrialization, they've emitted a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and they have a historic responsibility for the global warming that we're experiencing right now. And then the adaptation debt, which is climate vulnerability, is highest in the global south because of our regional or geostrategic positions or whatever the case is. But it's we are at the forefront of the climate crisis. So economic gain in one region is built on uncompensated environmental and social burdens elsewhere. And that is essentially the whole argument of historic emissions and responsibilities. When we look at the latest World Bank report, we see that global net outflow of debt repayments from the global south have reached 741 billion US dollars in 2022 and 2024 between these years. And the debt servicing costs and so external and debt servicing costs for the global south are very high right now. Global south countries have 2 to 4 times the borrowing costs for debt, for loans. And if we look at the UNEP's adaptation gap report, it says that developing countries need around 310 US billion dollars by 2035. And if we factor in the NDCs, that goes up to 365 billion, which we're nowhere near to achieving right now, even if we operationalize the committed amount. Then again, if we look at the NCQG for the climate finance, it is not ambitious enough. And again, the Baku-Dubalam roadmap, which has made a lot of promises for the operationalization of climate finance, again, is not ambitious enough. When we look at the inequalities that I was just talking about for debt servicing, one of the examples from very close to our heart, it's for the 2022 floods, where 30 billion US dollars were incurred in losses and damages for Pakistan. And then 1.7 million houses were destroyed. So the World Bank came up with a project called the Sindh Flood Emergency Housing Reconstruction Project. And it gave around 500 million US dollar in funding, and then compounded that with 450 million additional funds. And then ADB, the Islamic Development Bank, and the government of Sindh added to these numbers. But all of this financing came in the form of loans and more loans. And a country that is already struggling economically, you pile on more debt, you pile on more loans on them. And how are they going to survive? How are they going to fund climate action? How are they going to make resilient infrastructure if you've made it so that they are getting less than what they have gained or what they've given away? Quoting the discussion from the plenary today. So, like Zen said, the very financiers of the coal-fired power plants or fossil fuels are now financing renewable energy projects in the global south and the other countries. And the cost of financing RE projects through loans, through grants, through concessional, non-concessional financing is at least double the level that is required in advanced economies, which is counterproductive and counterintuitive. And it's even sometimes 3 times for projects in some markets. So it puts us at an economic and social disadvantage. So we cannot progress. And it keeps us reliant on the global north as well. But looking inwards and looking towards regional cooperation, we will try to find solutions in this session and figure our way out to foster collaboration, find indigenous, localized solutions to this problem of climate debt. So I would like to introduce my panelists first. First, we have Ms. Liddy Nagpil, who is an activist, and she's also the coordinator for the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. She is also the global co-coordinator of the Global Campaign to Define Climate Justice. Then we have Mr. Angelo Kairos de la Cruz, who is the Executive Director, Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, and he is also the head of climate finance team. We also have with us Ms. Anam Rathore, and she is the program lead at Pakistan Climate Vulnerable Forum in V20 Finance Minister, and she is an environment and climate change professional with over a decade of experience. We have Mr. Sunil Acharya, who is the Just Transition Campaign Manager at Recourse, and he is a prominent figure in the climate justice and just transition space. And finally, Dr. Syed Mohammad Hassan, Associate Professor at the Department of Economics at LUMS. So we're going to start off our session from our favorite panelist, Liddy. This question is for you. So you've talked about, you've given us a brief of what happened at the COP processes. And despite clear moral and economic imperative for climate finance, the COP process continues to disappoint us. From COP 27 to 28 to 30 now, we failed to operationalize loss and damage fund. We failed to make the Baku to Belém roadmap operational. So given your expertise, how do you assess the commitment of the developed world, particularly in the light of operationalizing of these funds, as well as the climate finance?
Well, first of all, just to qualify, the Fund to Respond to Loss and Damage, which is the official name, FRLD, is now being operationalized. So it's at the point where it has just recently launched its pilot program called the BIM, the Barbados Implementation Modalities. And this is where some of the major problems are. I mean, this has been a subject of our engagements and, you know, fights with the board on the operationalization question. It's set against the backdrop of a situation where you have very low pledges for the fund, only over $700 million, and even lower delivery of about 50%, over $300 million. And therefore, the pilot project, which is the BIM, is only going to have about $250 million. That is supposed to be provided for all of the developing countries that are in need of these funds, which is all are in need. So set against that backdrop, one of the issues that we have is they've adopted an approach that is, we believe, is a very totally inappropriate approach. And this approach has been mainly championed by the developed country board members with the support of some developing country board members. And this approach is you apply for a project. It will take a few months at the very least for this project to be developed, to be processed and approved, and then you get money. Whereas, if it's a fund for loss and damage, to respond to loss and damage, we're talking about phenomenon which require rapid response, right? So you have flooding. You can't wait 3 months or 4 months down the road in order to address the floods. You can probably apply that modality for the slow onset impacts that lead to loss and damage, which you can project down the road. But this is not in the nature of what we experience frequently around this time. It's mostly in the case of extreme climate-related weather events that require immediate response. So this is a big problem. And if the pilot program is going to determine the regular modalities of the fund, this is actually very dangerous, that we are going to have a fund that takes months before it can respond to anything. The other problem, of course, is that we're talking about very little funds here. They're talking about $10 to $20 million worth for each project proposal out of 250 million. So maybe what? You can serve maybe 15 countries in the next 1 to 2 years. So this is not, it doesn't augur very well for this fund to be actually succeeding. I mean, that's your very last question. I mean, we're beginning to believe that the board members or the developing country governments are not really serious about this fund, which is consistent with the fact that we got this approved in Egypt in the Sharm el-Sheikh COP, despite their objections, no? Because they've been objecting to the formation of the fund for many years. So that's the problem with this very big challenge for all of us. The problem of they are not wanting to give money. So we have a campaign, Fill the Fund, and the nature and modality. Nevertheless, it's an important mechanism. So we need to keep fighting to make sure it works for us.
Rightly so, and we need to keep fighting. So my next question is related to that. And Mr. Kairos, if I can direct this to you, so what common advocacy agenda should Asian countries that are led by the most vulnerable, like they should be front and center, so adopt at global forums like COPs? How do we advocate for better operationalization and fundamental reforms to the global financial structure and architecture to make it more responsible and make it more accessible for the adaptation needs of the global south?
Okay. First of all, thank you for staying awake. This is a very difficult time after lunch. So thank you for that, and thank you for the question. I think my first answer would be we should look beyond the COP and any formal formations to talk about problems problems that have been happening for decades, and we expect that we solve it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I think we should look beyond that. And adding on what Lydie already raised, I think what Asian countries can do, what Asia can do, is a lot of knowledge sharing when it comes to their successes and challenges in terms of how they are navigating around the complexities of climate finance modalities. For example, in the Green Climate Fund, which currently I'm serving as the developing
countries
CSO active observer, we're seeing a lot of proposals being pushed to this fund, not necessarily by countries, but the same culprits, as mentioned in the earlier session, but by the same culprits of the climate crisis that we are in. And this is not so much about countries giving up. It's really just on the technical side that we are missing constantly every day in our day-to-day tasks and work. Some of these, I'm pretty sure around this room, you would have a lot of ideas on how, for example, a solar, a guarantee fund can work, right? How can it lower cost? And unfortunately, in the same paragraph, I can say that none of us are working enough, for example, to fill up forms in the GCF, submit it, work with the government, and so on. So what we're talking about here is not being translated in the actual implementation in what's being submitted to these funds, the GCF in particular. And it's not our fault. We can only cover so much. But I think if we start sharing more of our challenges and even more of our successes as countries, and not treating the success to access a climate fund as an achievement of your own country, I think we can learn so much from each other, and maybe we don't have to redo everything whenever we think we can try to access these funds.
And very rightly so, this room would have a lot of suggestions and ideas about funds and tools that we can utilize. So if we could have the Slido QR codes displayed on our screens, all of our audience are requested to share any questions that you have through the Slido app. You can scan the code and the QR code. So you can send in your questions for the panelists, any comments, suggestions through the Slido app, and we'll take them after the session. So my next question is to Ms. Anam Rathore. Can you briefly tell us about your work with CVF and the Climate Prosperity Plan that you've been working on, and how can the CPP assist countries like Pakistan, which are at the forefront of climate vulnerability, to operationalize and mobilize climate finance for a just energy transition?
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for the question. The CVF Climate Vulnerable Forum and the Vulnerable Group of Finance Ministers, the V20, it represents countries on the front line of climate change, nations that have contributed the least to global emissions yet face the greatest economic and human impact. So right now, CVF V20, we represent 74 vulnerable economies, which is 1.7 billion people. And these are the people who contribute under 5% of global emissions, but are prone to, most of the climate catastrophes. So CVF V20, what we do is we support vulnerable economies, access climate finance, reduce risks, and build resilience. And I think one of the main thing is the collective political leverage that there is. By acting as a unified bloc, vulnerable economies like the 74 countries part of CVFE20 can push for global financial reforms that no other country can secure alone. So, it includes fairer access to concessional finance, longer and cheaper lending terms, proper financing for loss and damage. And when we talk about Pakistan, this also strengthens Pakistan's voice and its influence in shaping the global climate finance rules. Coming to the Climate Prosperity Plan that you mentioned, so the Climate Prosperity Plan, or CPP, it is one of the flagship initiatives of CVFE20. And it's not just a plan that we want to make and put it on the shelf. It is designed as an operational guide for transforming development pathways across national and provincial levels. So the CPP, or Climate Prosperity Plan of Pakistan, is almost done. We're just waiting for like a few final approvals. We've already made it for 4 countries, including Barbados, there's Bangladesh, there's Sri Lanka. And then there are a lot of like over a dozen more countries that are in the pathway. So as I said, the core strength of the CPP is that it places climate considerations directly inside economic planning, rather than treating climate action as a separate thing or an optional pillar. So when I talk about CPP, at the center of this approach is the country platform. So as I said, CPP and country platform, these are our 2 main initiatives. So what we want to do in a country platform is we want to bring together Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Climate Change, Planning Ministry, and also the provincial departments, and bring them together. And the platform, it will standardize when we talk about climate finance, how do we prepare these projects? How do we set clear sustainability criteria? How do we create a single system for evaluating the climate, the economic, and the environmental impacts? And in practical terms, it becomes a mechanism through which climate is integrated into every major public investment decision. So if I talk about the practical ways how CPP can be integrated and realistically when we talk about Pakistan, so again, institutionalizing a country platform, as I said before, we add the Ministry of Finance or whatever ministry the government decides, supported by, again, planning ministries, a platform that ensure that significant development proposals, when we're talking about any development proposals, when they're screened, we're talking about Pakistan's green economic model. So, this makes climate the first filter whenever we talk about any public investment decision, rather than usually when it's a last consideration. Secondly, we want strengthening project preparation and establishing a project development facility. So a lot of the times, as you mentioned too, that, when we talk about all these big funds, project development, you have to send projects. So many promising projects in Pakistan, and especially in a lot of countries, they do not, reach financially because there are not enough feasibility studies, sustainability assessments are not there, standardized documentation is not there. So in the Climate Prosperity Plan, we want to address this by having clear templates. We want environment and social screening to be an integral part of these projects. And also, if the project requires a special purpose vehicle, because it's really important that SPVs are also there when we're talking about big projects, or projects like renewable energy projects can be bundled together. And when we have SPVs, then it'll be more easy to attract investors. It can be more easy to have green bonds and concessional funds. Excuse me. Thank you. Another thing is, I think that's something that the government has already started, which is climate budget tagging, and also setting up a climate finance unit in Ministry of Finance, because budget tagging again helps the government and partners to track climate related spending and identify any gaps and overlays or overlaps there are. So if we have a dedicated unit that is making sure that, what is happening, what budget is going towards mitigation, where adaptation is happening. So when we talk about donors, we talk about we have a unit that is overlooking all this. So there's an investment pipeline, there is improved reporting, so there's transparency. So when we talk about multilaterals and development, so it's again easier to get financing. And aligning national and provincial policies, which is really important that, we have harmonized policies when we talk about the national energy policy or the national adaptation plan or the green taxonomy or even the carbon market rules. So when regulations and standards are aligned, climate positive investments move more smoothly and through approval processes. And again, we're talking about investors, so there's less uncertainty. So yeah, so when Pakistan can show that its policies, its budget, or any country can show that its policies, its budget, institutional, all support a single coherent climate and development strategy, accessing concessional finance becomes significantly easier. Development partners, we're talking about MDBs, they look for predictability, they want clarity, they want assurance that projects are part of the long-term assessment. And again, the climate prosperity plan, it provides all three, that when we have a investment pipeline, we have institutional structure, and we have an enabling environment. So it's easier to get finance for climate action. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Anam, for going into such detail and explaining what the climate prosperity plan is about. Coming back to the conversation around COP and the rhetoric that is very, very prevalent on COPs and other international platforms and forums, that the global South nations are responsible and they hold the primary responsibility for developing bankable projects that can be funded. Like Anam just mentioned, that we need to prove to the MDBs that our projects are bankable. So Sunil, my next question is to you. How do you see this playing out, given that developing countries are already struggling economies and they have limited capacities and resources and technologies? And also, how do you see the promises of MDBs, considering they all have their own resilience and sustainability frameworks? So how do you see that tying into this conversation?
Thank you, Amara, for bringing that important issue of the emerging focus on bankable projects, the focus on investment-ready programs, which are being promoted is in a diversity of initiatives and packages. As the developed countries fail to provide their obligatory climate finance for developing countries in a desperate measure and attempt to find money and resources are coming up with or are agreeing to mechanisms that aim to consolidate national climate priorities and align them with external support. These mechanisms to make investment case, or as you said, bankable projects, include ZPs, as you've seen in Indonesia or Vietnam, the climate prosperity plan that we just heard about from the 20 group of countries, and thematic concepts like Egypt's NWFE, which is Nexus of Water, Food, and Energy. The MDBs supposedly play a central role in rolling out investment to these compacts and are eyeing these initiatives as opportunity to provide further lending and more loans to developing countries. This is being promoted as the new architecture for climate and development finance. In theory, they bring all the actors from governments, the banks, the donors, and private finance under one nationally led strategic framework instead of fragmented projects. They are meant to convene, coordinate, and curate climate and development priorities into a coherent investment plan. More importantly, they are seen as second-best solutions, while bigger reforms like debt relief or global taxation remain stuck. But central to this is a question: do they actually shift power to countries or repackage old development finance models in a new green wrapper? Early experiences from who really, controls these initiatives. So the tension between country ownership on paper and creditor or investor priorities in practice. Let me give you a few examples. Donor conditionalities preside over national sovereignty. For example, in South Africa and Indonesia, the support was tied to market-driven energy reforms like utility unbundling. These resembles earlier privatization agendas, raising legal concerns that these initiatives can become vehicles for external economic models. The second is the over-reliance on private finance. These initiatives assume public money will be crowded in, be used to crowd in private capital. Yet, the evidence shows this rarely happens or materializes. In practice, countries take on guarantees and debt while investors get risk protection. The third is debt accumulation. Most climate finance entering these initiatives is loans, not grants, even for countries in debt distress. Most of the finance, as I said, is loans. In fact, the South African ZP had 96% of loans. This is the debt climate trap. Nations must borrow to address a crisis that they did not cause. Then finally, there's another element, which is democratic deficit. They're supposed to be prepared in a participatory and inclusive way. However, experience shows dramatic differences. South Africa, we had some sort of broad consultation process, but initiatives in Vietnam and Bangladesh had almost no civil society participation. This undermines the legitimacy and creates community pushback. In summary, these initiatives basically, or potentially rely on the failed Wall Street consensus model or approach that risk financializing development rather than genuinely empowering communities or countries. We should resist this repackaging of existing finance as new commitments without substantially changing the underlying financing gap. And we need to focus more on the obligation of the developed countries to provide accessible, equitable climate finance to developing countries so that the communities in these countries can build their lives, build their resilience, and come up with programs to transition to just energy future in their own terms. Lives and livelihoods, as we heard in the case of loss and damage, those lives and livelihoods devastated by climate crisis can be banked upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. And very rightly said that communities need to be front and center for every development related. We usually, in our development race and in our economic considerations, we forget the social aspect of it. And coming to you, Dr. Hassan, what standards, like Anam talked about the green bonds that and the climate tagging that has been mentioned in the NDCs. So how can we ensure that these standards, these bonds that have been pledged, they mobilize to truly support a just energy transition that considers the community perspective as well, in addition to our economic growth?
Right. So thank you for having me today. And also thanks for displaying a younger version of me on the screen earlier. that was refreshing to see how I looked 10 years back. So, so to your question about how these green instruments or green bonds could lead to a just transition, I would say that the updated NDCs, they do talk about green bonds, green sukuk bonds, but for the purpose of just transition, transition that is inclusive for everyone, particularly the most vulnerable ones, they need to be backed by credible standards. And in terms of, if we look at those standards, I would be brief here, but I would say that we can focus on three things. So first, whenever we have these bonds, we need to have like very clearly defined and quantifiable KPIs against them. So these KPIs should not just be limited to carbon metrics in terms of what is the decline or the reduction in emissions, but also in terms of how they can help improve affordability, inclusivity, and all of these social metrics, along with the carbon metrics, these could also be quantified, and they could be very helpful in terms of ensuring a just transition as a result of these bonds. The second thing which I would like to emphasize for these bonds to be carrying confidence of international institutions would be to improve in terms of those MRV requirements. So monitoring, reporting, and verification requirements through third-party audits, so that whatever we are doing, whatever we are presenting in terms of reducing emissions is not just greenwashing, but it is actually real reduction in emissions. That is something against which we can, maybe we can, that might be difficult, but maybe we can think of how to claim some sort of carbon credits against them. So use those Article 6 carbon markets idea against those. And finally, for something related to just transition, I would say that these proceeds from these bonds should target the frontline communities, the vulnerable communities, the farmers, the informal workers, the women-led micro enterprises, all of these, unless the proceeds are directed towards them through some sort of a direct financing window or some sort of an aggregation platform. So using those platforms, these individuals can benefit from these carbon markets some way. Unless we do that, this just transition would remain a dream, and these bonds may turn up to be an elite instrument again. So yeah, I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much. So just a reminder that if you have any questions for our panelists, we will be taking them at the end. You can use the link QR code displayed on the screen and share them through Slido. Continuing the conversation around IFIs and MDBs, Liddy, I'll come back to you again. And I would like to ask you, what role do you see of the MDBs? They're historically what they have played in compounding this debt that is on the global south, and how do you think they can reform their lending criteria and practices, specifically prioritize projects that address climate debt and increase resilience and support the social dimensions of a just energy transition?
Well, we know that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank has been playing a major role in the generation or creation of a condition where many of the global south countries are highly indebted. They've done this because, well, for instance, the IMF has been the one primarily having the role of providing standby credit whenever we have macroeconomic huge deficits, national deficits. And then the World Bank has led in lending for projects in the global south. And for this, the private sector came in because a lot of these projects also required co-financing from the private sector. No? So the situation historically, we don't have to maybe go through the details of that, is that they play not just the foremost role in creating the situation of debt, but they also set the rules and the framework for assessing countries' debt situations, and therefore for prescribing debt relief and debt restructuring arrangements. So we have the very famous debt sustainability framework that the IMF and the World Bank has authored, which is used by the G20, for instance, the bilateral creditors. And then the IMF gives a signal to private creditors in terms of whether a country is eligible for lending. Having acknowledged this, I find it very difficult to accept that these institutions will be leading in mobilizing for climate as well as development finance for countries that are already so much burdened by the public debt, no? Because we don't want to have climate solutions that will end up exacerbating our debt problems, or development solutions, or even immediate relief solutions, such as during the COVID crisis, when the debt levels of our countries went up by as much as 25 to 40%, because much of the emergency crisis response for COVID were in the form of loans. Climate finance, for instance, the very little climate finance flows is about 80% in the form of loans. So this is one situation we have been campaigning against, and therefore the only logical thing is to be opposing this notion that it is these institutions that will lead in the mobilization of finance for climate and the energy transition. Having said that, it doesn't mean that there is absolutely no role for loans in the energy transition. As I mentioned yesterday, given the fact that the power sector industry is not an industry that we want to be giving away energy for free. Secondly, power consumers include private sector industrial and commercial consumers, and therefore there should be cost recovery in the energy systems. And given that there is cost recovery in the energy systems, there are certain kinds of financing certain kinds of financing needs which can be filled by concessional loans. But to think that this is mostly going to be financed through loans is going to be really dangerous, no? Because we don't want to set up a new renewable energy system that is funded through loans, that is corporate driven, because that's going to be exactly the same thing we have with a fossil fuel energy system. So we want to transform that, not just in terms of the types of energy and technology, but the types of financing and the types of ownership and management structures. We want them to be more democratic. So I don't know what kind of reforms it will take, but definitely not in the nature of them still leading in the financing. Probably, for instance, one is that they have to enlarge their portfolio of highly concessional lending, because they also have portfolios for lending on market rates. No, actually IMF as well as the IBRD of the World Bank, that's market rates. We also have to look at the way the IFC functions, which is the arm of the World Bank that works with the private sector. So yeah, for us, we don't really have the advocacy of simply saying the World Bank, shift your finance from fossil fuels to RE. The story cannot be as simple as that.
No, definitely, the story is not as simple. So, Sunil, coming to you, we would like to have a better understanding of what these MDBs are considering in this reform process, because the conversation has been going in that direction internationally. So how do you see, and what was revealed about the reform process, and what understanding do we as CSOs have about the reform process? And I would also request that you weave in experiences of working at Recourse and how you have engaged IFIs as well.
Yeah, so Lydie has already provided the context and the problems and what is needed to be done, and it's a bit of an uphill task to build on that, but let me try. So I'll start by sharing with you all the sobering data that came out last week, and it was from World Bank themselves. So what it says is the low and middle income countries paid out $741 billion US more in principal and interest payment on their external debt between 2022 and 2024. So then that is the largest amount they have paid in the last 50 years. And to get to this, the IFIs have played a primary role. This I call the IFI comeback. So in light of the debt crisis triggered by COVID, the international community supported the increasing role for IFIs. Remember, many countries were already in bad debt situation, unsustainable debt levels, even before COVID. So what we've seen is also IFI comeback is in also the case for finance, where we have seen calls for an increased involvement of the MDBs, especially since COP26, and also in the subsequent COP decisions, as well as through G20 statements. In the context of climate resilience and just energy transition, what we have seen is that the MDBs continue to pursue the failed private sector first approach, continue to invest in export-oriented and extractive projects, push gas as a so-called transition fuel, and then they continue to finance fossil fuels and are increasingly focusing on false solutions and mega projects. I don't have to go into details of these. Further, in the name of renewable energy, they are pushing the same old colonial models in the name of transition. For these reasons, many in the civil society, you heard from Lydie, question whether the MDBs should have any role in climate and energy transition. Nevertheless, the World Bank and the IMF have themselves proposed a three-pillar approach for international financial architecture reform. The three pillars are: first, structural reforms and domestic resource mobilization, supported by their technical assistance, capacity development, and policy advice. The second pillar is external financial support, including through IFIs. And the third one is reducing debt servicing burdens where relevant. So this is what they put out on the table. But then the decisions of the MDBs are disappropriate, proportionately, they are influenced by major shareholders, including United States and the European countries. Rather than navigating today's geopolitical complexities with care that is required, they take the sides of their major shareholders. This is particularly stark in recent MDB disorientation in their climate and energy commitments. Pressured by the US and others, the World Bank and even the Asian Development Bank have moved to not talking about climate. They have stopped talking about climate and pursuing the technology neutral energy abundance agenda. They are greenlighting fossil fuels, nuclear projects, and mineral extraction, while we've seen, and we've heard from yesterday and today, silencing communities and civil society. The World Bank is now pushing the jobs agenda as one of its top, reform priorities. But can there be jobs in a dead planet? That's the question. So, despite the reform agenda further going against the global majority's aspiration, we as civil society continue to engage with this institution, and Recourse also engages with the shareholders, the executive directors in direct advocacy and campaigning. But we engage also more broadly to establish multilateral and transparent debt resolution mechanism, establish equitable tax cooperation mechanism, which are beyond these MDBs purview. But we also continue to shift these MDBs and IFI away from private sector first model that I talked about, and also global South representation and prioritize public interest, which is profound. So yeah, the struggle is huge. It's an uphill task, but sometimes engaging communities directly with these power holders, we've seen that sometimes we get some positive results. And also, for example, the recent example of the majority of World Bank shareholders making that public statement saying that they will stick to climate commitment. I think despite the US pressure, it's something to look for hope, but that's not enough.
So far, the conversation is going in a direction where we think the MDBs are not it, and we have to figure this out on our own. Moving towards Kairos, this question is to you. So, what do you think are necessary elements for an Asia-specific just transition finance taxonomy that we are in probably desperate need of? So, and not just a taxonomy that addresses the financial issues, but also the issues of equity and social and labor objectives alongside environmental criteria. And we ensure that the financial flows do not exacerbate social risks.
Yeah. Just a quick answer. I do not know the answer to that question directly. But I do think what we can work on is collectively working to reframe our approach as a region. We fixated so much on the nationally determined contributions as part of Paris, and then we've seen how countries are really struggling to come up with the numbers, even more so to come up with the numbers that they can live up to. Because we're so fixated on the agenda of doing everything we can to limit temperature increase to 1.5. And limiting temperature increase is important, but I think it does not fit if it's the only approach that we're going to take, even in our NDC. In a report that ICSC, one of our advisors, wrote with one of my good friends, Sarah Ahmed from V20, 4 years ago, the idea is that we have to reframe everything that we do, whether it's NDC, whether it's development plans. We have to reframe it towards resilience for the people on the ground, resilience and sustainable development. It makes more sense for developing countries if we approach those things. If you approach this thing through that pathway, because first, I mean, you do not just do renewable energy projects for the sake of setting carbon emissions. You do it because it's the only thing that makes more sense now, right? It makes economic sense, and since it makes economic sense, I mean, moving away from potential stranded assets, from potential and already stranded assets, in the form of fossil fuels, it will allow us to grow our economy without getting into more onerous debts, for example. And I think if we are able to do that reframing, we can start sort of unraveling the complexities of what a taxonomy should be. The Philippines has this fixation of creating everything first. Like, we have a sustainable finance framework. 2 months later, we have started our taxonomy on what sustainable finance is. But at the end of the day, our government would happily sign a policy loan with World Bank, despite all of these taxonomies. So we have to make that match as well. So if there's an Asia-specific just transition finance taxonomy, it has to come from the ground. It has to come from living experiences that countries already have, because it's highly possible that at the end of the day, we would have a different set of things and we would just agree on principles. At least we have started that important discussion. Yeah, thanks.
So yes, we need to have a taxonomy, or we need to build policies from the ground up. And we've repeatedly come to this conclusion, even in our line of work. So Dr. Hassan, I'll come back to you and ask you, what fiscal and regulatory policies and tools can be made available to the Global South government, specifically in the context of Pakistan, but overall implementing in Asia as well, to align national budgets with climate resilient development and also with our international and global commitments?
Okay, so thank you for keeping the discussion live. So if we look at the fiscal and monetary tools generally available, the public finance management tools available to governments in developing countries, and if we take a stock of available tools, we find that they already have sufficient number of tools available. Rather, most of these economies are over-regulated. They have multitude of regulations, at times conflicting with one another, causing hurdles in the way of achieving any goal. So because those regulations, some of those they are carrying forward from the colonial era, some are the newly ones installed in place at the behest of these multilateral organizations, and without realizing, nobody has the confidence to remove earlier regulations before they install new ones. So these are they have too many tools already available. The need is to how to utilize these in a way that could help in making progress regarding our global commitments or national priorities for climate change. So I will focus on few of these. I was looking at the NDC 3.0 document yesterday, and I saw that, and I'm also mentioned that it mentions this climate budget tagging exercise that Ministry of Finance in Pakistan has already started that. But when I further researched on that, it appeared that most of that exercise is being done retrospectively. So consultants are looking at the expenditure already done and then allocating part of that expenditure towards climate-related activities. So we are not doing that prospectively. We are not looking at when we are making an expenditure before that, how is that going to help or hinder in terms of our goals regarding these climate change policies. But we are doing that retrospectively, so we need to have a thought how to improve on that. We can also, somebody mentioned about availability of funds not in line with the requirements of these multi-year climate related projects. So we need to have some sort of a, there is already a medium-term framework for budgeting, but that needs to be aligned with the requirements of these climate related activities or actions which span over multi-year years, so that do not face delays on account of non-availability of funds in between. We also need to think about how, particularly for the budgeting tools, how incentives, targeted incentives could be created that could help in terms of having short-term economic relief or economic benefits. So particularly like the solarization problem, we have all seen that once the solarization picked up on the initiative of the private interests, there was an uncertainty created regarding how useful it would be for an individual to install these solar panels. So we need to have like policies which give more certain outcomes for the household, particularly, which are investing their finances on that. On the regulatory side, again, related to solarization is the net metering thing. And again, we do not have a very certain policy giving us how this would be useful over the time, whether the rates at which the units are being purchased or sold to the individual household remain the same over the next 10 or 15 years, or are they going to be drastically changed? Carbon screening is something again being mentioned in terms of projects. I know that this environmental impact assessment has already been a part of the PC1 approval process in Pakistan, but I have hardly seen any project being denied acceptance on the basis of this environmental impact assessment thing, and mostly it is taken as a routine exercise, which is one document that has to be completed instead of going towards the full spirit of that document. Similarly, I'm an urban economist, so I would say that there is need in terms of regulations to focus on how urban planning can help in terms of achieving cleaner cities where we can have standards for buildings which are energy efficient and so on and so forth. So I'll stop here after this. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. And Anam, similar question to you, but maybe look into the provincial perspective as well. Like, again, if we're looking at bottom-up policy approaches and bottom-up approaches to project development, how can we ensure that if frontline communities and then the provinces and then national level governments are involved, and just the policies are very equitable and considerate of the socio-environmental aspects, and also they're equitable when they're implemented? And how can we expand our fiscal space to implement these projects?
I'll first talk about the fiscal space thing. We all know that, I think it was mentioned before as well, that ODA is shrinking. It's expected that by 2027, there'll be a 20% decrease. So it's really important that the fiscal and regulatory frameworks within the country is, expanded so that there's more, again, domestic fiscal space. When we talk about Pakistan, it faces serious financial constraints. There is a need for practical reforms. As Dr. Saad also mentioned that, sometimes there is a policy is already there, but, we have to improve the system. We have to improve the implementation of it. So for me, again, I'll talk about the budget tagging and the subsidiary reforms, that it's really important that when you tag the mitigation and adaptation spending in the national budget, especially when we talk about Pakistan, we can clearly identify that what's inefficient and what's harmful subsidies are already there. Because, the climate is changing, the climate space is changing. So especially when we look at energy and we look at agriculture, and then it's really important that they're reallocated towards the climate smart and nature positive programs. So this can also free up fiscal space. We can also, again, look at it through more of a provincial lens. Another thing, I think all of these points have been discussed throughout the day, that we talked about promoting local currency, green financing. It's really important that, that we issue local currency green bonds and green sukuk, because it will reduce the risk of foreign exchange. It will attract investors who are seeking, sustainable assets. But in parallel, we can also engage creditors that, for longer maturity, we need that there should be lower cost of financing, particularly for when we talk about climate related investments. And what that can do is it can also ease annual debt servicing pressure that we're facing right now. Then deploying de-risking instruments. It's really important, again, when we talk about doing any project, that, the guarantees, the first loss capital, the currency hedging tools. When we talk about the early stage project preparation grant, it reduces the risks for private investors. And then it's really, it becomes a little easier to, again, mobilize institutional capital. And then modernizing the fiscal rules and debt sustainability assessment. So when we talk about traditional debt assessment, it doesn't account for the, when we talk about the avoided losses from climate adaptation. Working with international partners, it's really important that we include resilience dividends into it, into the assessment strengthening, and it'll strengthen Pakistan or any country's case for concessional financing, and also make climate investment more viable within the fiscal rules. And then we talked about, again, green taxonomy. So when green taxonomy it adheres to the policy of do no significant harm standard. And, the risk of environment and socially harmful investment will also decrease in that way. And the last is financing sector reform. So when we talk about, again, local encouraging banks, insurers, and pension funds to adopt green investment targets and enabling long-term green lending, it can also unlock significant domestic capital. So if we have the right regulatory incentives and risk-sharing tools, Pakistan can, financial sector can become a major drive for green growth. Because if you talk about I've talked to a lot of like these projects, people who want to start green projects in Pakistan, and it's really difficult for them to get financing from local banks. So again, we need a financial sector reform so that, again, the forex exchange, that loss that we face, that's not there. And when I think what was the first part of the question? Can you repeat it, please?
So I asked, how can we ensure that the policies or any project that is developed, it comes from the bottom up rather than top down approach, like include provincial governments in the planning process and the policy making process, rather than just keeping it at a national level like most of our policies are made.
In my experience, if it's a provincial level project, it usually comes from the project. But what CVF V20, the country platform that I mentioned before. So country platform is something that is federal ministries, but also provincial departments involved in it as well. Because again, when developing a project, I think there's a similar question up there as well, that it's really important that the people who are at the front line, they're part of the development. And I've been part of developing projects for GCF and Adaptation Fund. And it's also, when we talk about these big funds, it's one of their requirements that the communities, the people who are directly involved, are part of the project preparation phase. So I think this is something we talked about before as well, that sometimes the things are there, the policies are there. So what we have to do is ensure that they're followed and ensure that the implementation process is there. But yeah, I think it's really important that there's a top-up and bottom-up approach when we're talking about any climate action activity.
Thank you, Anam. So it all comes down to reforming the processes that already exist, but utilizing indigenous knowledge, utilizing localized experiences and knowledge, and creating a South-South collaborative environment. So we have a few questions for the panelists as well. And okay, so Liddy, if you or Kairos would like to take this, what do you think of debt for climate swaps and debt for nature swaps? Because these have been an emerging tool and they have been in the international conversations. So if you'd like to take this.
We do not endorse or suggest debt for nature or debt or any kind of debt swaps for that matter. Because we've found in our experience, most of the swaps that have taken place have not really actually redounded neither for debt relief, because it's not that you're not going to pay your debts anymore. You're going to have to shell out the money in order to use it for other purposes. And then secondly, rather than actually giving you relief, some of the debt swap arrangements makes you give the money up front right away rather than giving it across a period. And then there's a lot of problems about the programs that are being set up for the debt for nature, debt for climate swaps, in terms of is it really the kind of programs or projects that the country needs for climate or for nature? I guess the most compelling reason is that it really weakens our argument for debt cancellation, because it's a recognition that these debts can be paid, except that you're rechanneling the resources for something else. When it's there's a lot of dimensions to the debt problem. It's not just that it's very difficult for us to pay the debts. It's affecting our spending on public services, but it's also a question of prioritizing what we're going to be using if we have debt relief, what the funds will be used for. So there's a lot of dimensions to that, and acknowledging, for instance, that some of them are actually harmful debts. It's not that they're difficult to pay, and therefore, and we call it the question of illegitimacy of debt or illegitimate debts. And therefore, it's also a question of should we be paying for these debts, even if we could afford it, for instance. No. So yeah, that's not within our menu of options, these debt swaps.
No.
We call it one of the false solutions to
Yes.
financial solutions.
Kairos, would you like to add something to this?
It's always tricky to go after my auntie, to go after Liddy. I think on that, and I'm gonna don't shoot me on this. I'm just gonna answer in a very technical way as a climate finance practitioner. I think yes, Liddy is correct in saying that there are many other better options to go around debt management. But at the same time, you should also recognize that it's already happening as well. For example, in the GCF, I think 2 board meetings ago, in the Green Climate Fund, it's available online. You can have a look at it. There's a proposal specifically for debt, for swap, like something like this. So I think it's worthwhile looking into, just to understand the approach, and just also to understand the reasons behind why the biggest multilateral climate fund, for example, is actually supportive of it. Because then if we really, I mean, after all of this review, if we really think it's something that should be out of the menu, then we can make a better case based on the evidence and the analysis that we have. And that's my technical answer to that.
Right, and it's also mentioned in the Baku Belem roadmap, so debt for climate swaps and other similar tools.
We actually have a similar idea that I'd just like to say here. This is a conversion of debt into grants, no? So it works a little differently. So what we have been developing is this idea of if there is any outstanding debt owed from coal projects or any other fossil fuel projects, that we are pushing for the creditor or the lender to transform this outstanding portion into grants for renewable energy without conditions, which means you don't have the problem of paying upfront. For instance, the country can decide how to pay it out. And then it's very specifically for renewable energy projects. It's not for any other package project as nature or climate. No, so very, very specific.
So Lydia, we have another question for you. Social movements are demanding to abolish the WTO and the new trade frameworks, and I think same should be the case of IMF and World Bank. Would like to know your perspective on this. So they're thinking of abolishing these institutions.
You know, the civil society has a range of proposals for what to do with these institutions. We happen to belong to the end of the proposal for us to set up alternative institutions that serve our purposes. And this was a very popular idea a few years back, no? For the South to set up our own institutions, which means we don't really believe these institutions are serving our purpose. So why not just shut them down and we create our own, right? That's where we're coming from. But if you want to see the whole range of perspective of civil society on this, there is at least one thing that we're very clearly in unity, and that is stopping the harm. That is recognizing that these institutions have been doing a lot of harm. So at the very least, the agenda would be to stop the harm.
So it comes down to, rather than burning it all to the ground, we reform them and make them better. So include indigenous knowledge and make it very inclusive towards the community.
Well, if we define reform by overhauling their mandate altogether and overhauling their entire governance structure altogether, then maybe we can use that word. But oftentimes, that's not what they really mean, right? So I'm not very happy with just reforming.
Okay, I think we should end on that note because thank you so much for being such a great panel. Thank you to all my panelists. And thank you everyone for listening. So we're going to move to our next sessions in a while. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
And then the next one you
If I could request everyone to kindly be seated so that we can proceed with our day. So we are going to move towards reflections from our parallel discussions and breakout rooms. So from the breakout session beyond centralized infrastructure towards a flexible grid, I would like to invite Mr. Syed Faizan Ali Shah, Energy Advisor, Ministry of Energy Power Division, to kindly present the reflections from that session.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So from our session related to the flexibility of the grids, moving towards decentralization, we first defined what the flexibility actually is, what sort of flexibility is required. So since we have grids divided into two parts, one is the transmission and one is the distribution, most of the people-driven solar revolution is coming from the distribution side. So there's a lot of flexibility required at the distribution scale. Some sort of flexibility in the form of system operator exists at the transmission system level, but still, as more and more solar is coming into the distribution side, that flexibility at the transmission system operator is lacking because the assets or the distributed energy generation is mainly installed at the distribution grid side. So there is total or no control over those distributed energy resources, which we call the net metered systems or behind the meter systems. So it was basically a consensus developed that yes, flexibility is required over the distributed energy generation sources, which are installed in the distribution grid. Next, it was that what is the challenge? What sort of challenges exist? So three challenges were basically discussed. It was divided into the three different groups. One is the technical challenge, then comes the financial challenge, and then the regulatory challenge. In the technical challenge, it was decided that since there is no smart meters, no data centers, lack of communication infrastructure at the distribution side, so these are some of the more or less newer technology which is required to be deployed at the distribution system side. So smart meters at the consumer premises, specifically at those where the distributed generation exists, for example, the net metering systems, they have to be deployed. Then the communication infrastructure at the moment, it's the GSM network is being used. So there are multiple communication infrastructure which needs to be invested in the distribution side. And then lastly, the data centers, right? The data centers need to be there on which you will implement some sort of application or host some applications for the management of these distributed energy resources. Apart from that, another technology which was discussed was the battery energy storage systems. So a lot of the battery energy storage system, or BESS, is the new buzzword around Pakistan. So that is something which was discussed in the breakout session, that where these need to be deployed. So it was also discussed that like solar revolution, which is the people-driven revolution, right now we're also undergoing a battery energy storage revolution, which is also a people-driven revolution. A lot of people are installing battery energy storage systems directly at their houses. And then the utility scale battery energy storage systems lack the deployment due to, obviously the public procurement and regulations are involved. So this was the technical challenges which were discussed. Then comes the financial challenges. So all these technologies, whether the smart meters, whether communication infrastructures, whether battery energy storage systems, these require a lot of investments. Unfortunately, Pakistan is always fiscally constrained when it comes to the investments. For example, so AMI, if we talk about AMI, around $3 billion, if we want to deploy smart meters across all the consumers, we have around 38 million consumers. So we need around $3 to $4 billion of investment. So where will that come from? Then we need investment in the data centers where we need to host. So the distribution companies have to host these data centers where these applications need to be deployed. So that investment is currently lacking as well. So overall, the investment opportunities are considerably less. And then this is where the state-owned entities need to partner up with, funding agencies, donor agencies, deploy the green climate funding and all, on reduced interest rates to, deploy these technologies. Then the regulatory challenges were discussed. As far as the regulatory challenges were discussed, it was discussed that, flexibility is of different types. So there is soft sort of flexibility, and then there is a hard sort of flexibility. In the soft flexibility part, where you need control, where you need, such mechanisms where you can induce or you can control the demand. So these demands can be controlled through tariff-based systems, right? You have dynamic tariff systems, so where you can control different sort of your daytime energy demand, because a lot of solar is coming in the daytime. And similarly, EVs are coming in. So why don't you incentivize daytime energy consumption? And that is all only you can do through the dynamic tariff systems. Similarly, you can change your regulations or grid codes. The grid codes can be changed so that, these inverter-based resources which are implemented at the household level, they have some sort of different operating modes as well. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're only exploiting singular sort of mode. So they have different mechanisms where, by changing the codes, you can induce flexibility as well. And then last but not the least, there was another option which was discussed, and that was due to the the battery energy storage systems. Either you install it at the household level or at the utility scale level. But this is sort of a hard format where you need a lot of investments at the utility scale level, number one. And then for example, you can also induce flexibility through the gas-fired power plants, through Dr. Saab mentioned the thermal power plants. You can induce the flexibility, but that is the hard part of the flexibility, where a lot of much more investment is required rather than the soft part. So overall, it was a consensus that yes, flexibility is required, because we are reaching at a level where the solar is being concentrated at some parts of the grid. And then there is a lot of reverse power flows and issues like voltage swelling and, this ramping or the duck curve which we are facing. In some parts of the grids, we are facing this. So in overall, the challenges exist. But to cover those, we need, consensus, investments, and regulatory changes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faizan. For the second session that was on addressing climate debt, transforming economic and financial systems to support a just transition, I would like to invite Mr. Sunil Acharya, Just Transition Campaign Manager at Recourse.
Well, we had a very engaging panel on this issue of highly contentious sometimes, issue of debt and climate justice, and the role of economic and financial transformation that is required. We started with a bit of a historical perspective on, how the debt itself started, and how debt reform or debt resolution is not a new concept. And then we went on to talk about the existing global climate mechanism, which continue to fail to provide just climate finance to developing countries, the limitations of the mechanisms that have been set up and making the developing countries trouble in coming up with the bankable financing projects that are required. But we also touched upon the efforts that developing countries are making to address climate crisis and transition into just energy futures. The plethora of policies, regulation changes, and the projects that the developing countries are developing, which fail to be provided with enough support or right kind of support. We then also talked about the role of multilateral development banks or the international financial institutions in compounding the debt crisis by providing wrong type of financing that is not required by the developing countries. But then we also talked about the collective measures that the countries in the region, particularly in Asia, need to take in terms of coming up with pragmatic proposals that can transform this system, which has been problematic to all of us. Thank you so much.
For session 3, Scaling Renewable Energy and Distributed Generation in Asia, I would like to invite Mr. Umar Farooq, the senior researcher at LUMS Energy Institute. And Umar, if you could kindly wrap this up quickly, thank you so much.
Thank you. We had some great discussions. Given the limited time, I'll just point out a few. The first thing that we understood, the solar is a reality and we need to understand it and we need to see it from that perspective. And we, all of us, including the government and the distribution companies, need to realize it and accept it as a reality. Number two, the battery energy storage systems are a game changer for the grid, for the battery energy storage, for the distributed generation, and for the future integration of the renewables. So we need to somehow bring in some financial mechanisms so that they can support the healthy development and deployment of battery storage in the system. Because solar, from the grid perspective, solar is just one problem, and battery itself is a solution to those problems, as they can somehow get rid of the duck curve, for example. Then we discussed that the grid seems to be largely unprepared when it comes to renewable energy adoption, especially at the distributed scale. The grid infrastructure is inadequate. We are not investing enough in the digitization or the real-time control of distribution generation. Then the communication systems are falling apart. We don't have the required set of, you can say, the infrastructure at the distribution level. Then we have tariff structures that are somehow discouraging the future introduction of the new technologies into at the distributed scale. And then we talk about the just energy transition, which is kind of largely ignored in under the Pakistan's concept, especially. So we need to understand that within that limited space in the politics, in the economy, and on the technical side, we need to come up with certain set of regulations or reforms that can support just energy transition in the future. And we need to realize that as a necessity and not as something that is just said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Umar. And now, as we wrap up our very productive sessions, I would like to invite Mr. Mohammad Badr Alam, the CEO of Policy Research Institute for Equitable Development, to moderate the closing plenary session on energy diplomacy.
Thank you, Amara. I would like to first invite our Minister for Climate Change and Environmental Coordination, Dr. Musaddiq Malik, to come up here and deliver an opening statement. The format is that you will deliver an opening statement and then you will sit down here and we will ask you some questions from the rostrum as well as from the audience. And we will do the same with our second guest, Dr. Nafisa Shah, who is an honorable member of the parliament and is also the co-convener of Parliamentary Forum on Energy and Economy. So Dr. Musaddiq first, please come.
Assalamu alaikum very much. I'm not prepared for an opening statement. I was told that it was just going to be a panel. I just have to wing it. And I thought it was like a talk show. And my view was that, whoa, piece of cake. I do this every evening. So if LUMS want me to do this, I'll show up, I'll sit there, I'll answer questions, I'll go around them rather than asking them directly. And that will be the end of it. 35, 40 minutes and I'd be done. So truthfully, I'm not prepared for an opening statement. And truthfully, other than the fact that this is about energy transition, I don't even know what you guys have been discussing. So what opening statement can I give if I've not been a part of the discussions? I had to be a part of the discussions to understand what you guys are talking about, to figure out what issues you want me to focus on. And only then I can give you some kind of opening statement. Otherwise, it would just be a written statement of some sorts that the Ministry of, it doesn't work like that. So you put me on the spot, and I'll just throw a few things at you and then settle in and see what questions you have. I personally think that all the things that we are doing are, I think, dated. I think all of the things that we are talking about very soon, when I have my grandchildren, I'm going to walk them and I'm going to show them that, this used to be a 500, 600 kV transmission line. Where's Dr. Saab? Dr. Saab is going to hate me for this. But I think this is dinosaurs. I think we're all but done with this kind of system. And all of these billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars worth of investments that we are doing and the capital that we are raising for all of this infrastructure, I think is dated. Right now, I live just about 5-6 miles, 4 miles from here. And I have solar on my rooftop. And I have a battery solution which gets me going for about 5 hours or 6 hours. As soon as it's 14 hours, I'm off your grid. And there's nothing you'd be able to do about it. That's it. I'm done. And I'd be very happy being done. So the rate at which the battery technology is changing, not just in the way of technology, but also in the way of its commercialization or its commercial potential. I mean, it's the same thing that happened to solar technology in 2013 when we started with 22 cents worth of a unit is happening to the battery technology. It fell from 22 cents to 2 cents. And what do you think is going to happen to the battery solutions? And they're already coming up. They're no more talking about lithium. They're already talking about new materials. The Germans are talking about new materials. They're talking about new fluids. And they're talking about new kinds of battery solutions. And as soon as they hit you, what are you going to do? So all of these discussions would be moot. And all of these transmissions, I'm simplifying. I'm trying to provoke you guys to have a very interesting discussion. So it's not like you wouldn't need some kind of base load. Because at the policy level, you'll have to think about it. But then when all of the people who are sitting here, students and teachers alike, when they go off grid, the only people who would be on the grid are the poor people of Pakistan. So what are you going to do for them? And how? Because they don't have rooftops. So if they don't have rooftops, where they're going to put their solar and where they're going to put the batteries and where's the money going to come from at the consumption side? Look at the level of poverty in Pakistan. I was looking at the BISP data and I found out the fourth quintile is what, 70-some thousand or something like that, 80-some thousand rupees. So when the fourth quintile, and there's one quintile which are the affluent who don't report into BISP, but I used the household income survey and I laid it on top of basically the BISP kind of poverty score and used the household income data to model what their income is based upon what they were consuming. And this is what I came up with. So how are you going to create a solution for those who make 30,000 rupees or 22,000 rupees or 44,000 rupees or 54,000 rupees or 64,000 rupees or 67,000 rupees? Because that's what Pakistan is all about. And it's lopsided. It's not a normal distribution. It's a completely kind of non-normal distribution of people in terms of their affordability, in terms of their poverty. And nearly all of the people, not most of the people, are onto this side. So on the one side, I'm telling you that the solution is that as soon as I get 12 to 14 hours of battery solution, I'm out. On the other hand, I'm telling you that most of Pakistan is not me. What are you going to do with them? So this is basically the policy discussion that coming to LUMS is something that I'd like to have. This is where I would like to see utility economists and engineers put their heads together and come up with a solution, not basically the hypothetical solution that you can read in a $35 book, but the real solution of poverty in Pakistan, the real solution. That's what we're seeking. That's why we keep coming to LUMS. That's why I keep bugging Dr. Saab at odd hours, in the middle of the night, early in the morning, get trapped, you know. I'm a mind-minded guy. From my perspective, you know, if the total cost of your energy is less than the variable cost of what you have deployed, you need to get rid of that, whatever you have deployed. That's it. It's as simple as that. If you can produce electricity at 2 cents, and that's the total cost of electricity, production cost, or 3 cents or 4 cents, and your variable cost is 6 cents, dump that. Even with the capacity payment, dump that. So it's as simple as that, theoretically. Now it's the art of providing soft landing as you move from this kind of theoretical framework to the policy framework, where every step of the way you have to provide softer landing for those who are most vulnerable and most poor. That's about the pathway that we need to put together. Instead of what I see, the fixation of nearly everyone is the big infrastructure. We import about what? $5 to $6 billion worth of motor gasoline. If we made zero duty EVs, $6 billion gone. No need. And what else happens? The capacity payments come down. Because right now, our cost of generation is about 30 rupees. I'm not the power minister. I know these things, but I'm not the power minister. And the numbers may have changed a little bit, but not a whole lot. So just the gross estimation, 30 rupees is the cost of generation. Of that, 20 rupees is capacity payment, 20 to 21 rupees. Really? Does it make sense? Does it make any sense? And therefore, the only way out is not to put in or install more electricity. And the only other thing to do is bring the cost down so that the utilization, because the price elasticity of electricity is enormous. I've seen it myself. You bring it down, the utilization goes up. You bring EVs, the utilization goes even more up. And when you spread out this fixed cost that you call capacity payment over all of these new utilizations, which are going to be a function of either the cost coming down or the electricity revolution coming up, you have a reasonable solution for the poor. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution. We can model it, but we first have to agree that this basically is the direction in which we want to go. This is the direction in which I want to go, I as an individual. This is where my heart is. This is where I believe the future is. And I think as policymakers, our job is to write the history of future. That's our job. I think that's your job as academics as well. So let's put our hands together and let's write that history. Something that works. If I were to invest, I would be investing in battery technology. That's what I would be doing. If I were to invest, I would be investing in recycling of all of these minerals and metals, which are not going to, the feedstock, the supply chain eventually is not going to, it's going to get exhausted because these are materials which are going to, they're not replenishable. When you take copper out, it's not naturally replenished, it's gone. And there's no electrification revolution without copper revolution. And therefore, in order for you to have abundant copper supplies, you need to do recycling, or you need to have a circular economy for copper. So because I was not prepared, if you want, I can talk about distribution. If you want, I can talk about generation. If you want, I can talk about transmission. I thought unprepared as I am, I should just give you my worldview. And I would invite you to throw me off. Tell me that what I'm saying is not true. Tell me that if the total cost of solar or basically solar and wind together, because you also have to understand that we're very lucky. Wind and solar are counter-cyclical in Pakistan. They're not counter-cyclical in the rest of the world. The wind blows in the evening and sun goes down in the evening. Sun comes up and the wind goes down. It's counter-cyclical. You can actually have a hybrid solution, which if supported by battery solution can give you some sensible kind of path forward. So use that. Use that. The only issue that came in the way of these renewables was their availability, 22% or 30%. That's really very poor availability, plant factor, very poor plant factors. So in order for you to have 1,000 megawatts worth of a capacity for solar, you need to install 400. It makes zero sense. But with battery solutions, it makes perfect sense. It begins to make perfect sense. So I would only say that in my world, there's no difference between ideology and ignorance. Both of them don't require evidence. You can be driven ideologically, and by ideological, I don't mean ideology of energy. I see also the ideology of technology. Some people are fixated. They're married to ideas. Well, I'm married to evidence. You bring forth the evidence and I stand defeated. It's very easy to defeat me. So thank you very much. And I'll try my best to field your questions. But I'm sorry, I did not know. I could be specific. I can still be specific if you tell me what you want me to speak on. You didn't tell me. So my wife tells me I have what is called an alligator syndrome. You know what that is? Big mouth, no ears. So I did my job. I'll go back to my wife and tell her I did what I always do. Thank you very much.
So yes, it's the sign of a consummate communicator that you ask the questions that we were supposed to ask you, rather than having to answer those in your opening statement. But thank you for raising all the right questions. We will getting back to you for some answers as well. I now request Dr. Nafisa Shah to come to the stage and make her opening statement.
First of all, management of LUMS and then Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition members, Alliance for Climate Justice members, students, faculty, civil society, experts, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, many thanks for inviting me to this forum that for me, as I said, I come here to be schooled. Last year also, I was here in the first Asia Energy Transition Summit. I was here standing in the same place. And of course, I talked about our Energy Forum, and that's why I'm here. I represent the Energy Forum, Energy and Economy Forum in the Parliament. And then last year, and all the speeches that I've made on this issue, I begin with the usual refrain. And I will again repeat that, because that is where my issue with this whole, the energy crisis comes from. And it's not days, it's not years, but it's decades since the people of Pakistan have endured a chronic energy crisis. Even today, for millions in Pakistan, the flicker of a bulb is a luxury. Load shedding, a term coined in the 90s for power rationing by distribution companies, is not just a household name, it's a dreaded term, a symbol of chronic energy deficit that has dimmed homes, stalled factories, and shattered the dreams of a nation. I've said this before, and I keep saying it, and I need to say it again and again, unfortunately, because that's a lived reality. I mean, one lived reality was spoken by the minister, honorable minister, and I'll speak of the lived reality in the area I come from. I have been a witness to these years of loss and deprivation, anger and helplessness of the people of my area in multiple ways. First, as a Nazim in the 2000s, and then as a public representative subsequently. For us now, it is not the Thana or Kacheri or the police station that is the cause of public worry. It is the electricity or its absence. And hence, this making of the Cross-Party Energy Forum in the Parliament, which is a group of members that convene sessions on pressing issues. Basically, we try to learn ourselves and we try to engage, because what I believe is that the disengagement with all this issue had led to a series of policy failures, which has made us stand where we are today. So we seek to understand, to question, and at times even to challenge. A forum that seeks answers and alternative vision of cleaner, cheaper energy sources that are reliable and easily obtained. So ladies and gentlemen, in the larger picture, energy has been an intrinsic part of our geopolitical landscape of this region. For years, Pakistan has presented itself as a natural bridge between energy-rich heartlands of Central Asia and Middle East and the massive markets of South Asia, recognizing our geography not as a burden, but as a destiny promising geostrategic relevance. Our geographical position brings with it the enormous potential for transit fees, jobs, infrastructure, and possibility of turning into a pivotal trade and energy corridor, a nation that connects regions and powers. With this vantage point, energy diplomacy has to be an essential part of policy, not only for us as an energy-starved country, but also beyond, to seek investments, to undertake joint ventures, to seek connectivities for upgradation of infrastructure and for technological innovation. But I'm here today to argue that for a country in Pakistan's unique position, this tool has unfortunately been less an instrument of delivering cheap electricity and more a double-edged sword, in part because our own policy failures and in part due to fossil fuel-led geopolitical rivalries. 3 examples that potentially could have supported Pakistan economically, could have been game changers that they were dubbed to be, have all either stalled, faltered, or remain unrealized, often accumulating debt and a wasteland of unfinished projects. Take, for instance, the monumental China-Pakistan economic corridor that was considered to change Pakistan's energy landscape, and with it, its network of power plants that today add some megawatts to our struggling grid. When this project was announced, it was really poetry to our ears. I still remember Mia Saab standing in front of the house and talking about the Pakistan-China economic corridor, and it really, we felt as a backbencher, I felt this was going to be a dream for us. Imagine Pakistan-China economic corridor's offerings, billions of investment in rails, in roads, in power projects. With heady Chinese investment, Pakistan could have become a major economic hub, which could have catapulted us towards being an economic power. But in reaching out for our energy needs, we were embroiled into a whirlwind of great power rivalries. Our greatest infrastructure endeavor, the CPEC, was not just seen as an economic project by other powers, but as a chess board in a contest between giants. We became a theater for competition, straining old alliances and forcing impossible choices. The second important segment in energy diplomacy were the pipelines. First, the Iran-Pakistan pipeline, which was again considered a milestone in energy diplomacy, and later the TAPI, linking Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. While Iran completed its side of the pipeline, Pakistan could not complete its part because of the threat of international sanctions. Similarly, the TAPI pipeline seemed a non-starter as the security situation in Afghanistan has not led to its realization. Another outcome of energy diplomacy going to a waste, and I don't know if the minister would agree with me, But I'm also going to, he was very provocative, but I'll try to also be provocative in some of my statements. The LNG agreement from Qatar was also considered a milestone in energy diplomacy, a promise of cheap gas, but instead it has led to a new circular debt relating to now the petroleum consumption. From all these examples, it seems that the fossil fuel-based mega project energy diplomacy has not really delivered, as firstly due to our own failure to ensure that it meets the requirements of the day-to-day, and the people of Pakistan. And secondly, it often forces us to walk a diplomatic tightrope within competing interests and great games. In the final analysis, these fossil fuel-based projects, pipelines, and agreements have become strategic vulnerabilities and magnets for disruption in a volatile region. And perhaps most insidiously, it can and has cut our sovereignty. Pakistan's decisions in energy investments have ironically burdened us with colossal debt, where the burden of repayment can constrain our policy choices. The quest for energy security has, paradoxically, led to a new dependency on imported fuels and on foreign capital. It is estimated that the debt burden of our energy-related follies is nearing 5,000 billion a year. It changes, of course, but that's estimated 2,500 billion for the circular debt for power projects, and then the other side for LNG and petroleum-related circular debt. So energy diplomacy, therefore, must explore new avenues. The answer lies perhaps in diversification, moving away from fossil fuels towards the cheaper renewables, the energy transition. And so that's where I stand today, the Asia energy transition, and arguing for a new kind of an energy diplomacy that moves away from the fossil fuel, because our experience has been mixed at best. And so moving towards energy transition as being the linchpin of our new energy diplomacy. So energy transition, at the same time, moving from government to government large agreements to localized business to business approaches. The energy diplomacy must move away from pipelines and corridors to smaller investments in renewables and support an energy transition, all of which promise more for less. We must consider coupling every megawatt from an imported plant with a greater investment in indigenous solar, wind, and hydro power. In fact, the people of Pakistan have already made their choice. And there's a very big estimate that Pride has given that figure, that the figure of solar that the people of Pakistan has adopted is almost as big as the mainstream energy. And I didn't agree with this figure, but it seems that is what it is. So but let me also say that the people of Pakistan did not make this choice as a voluntary choice. They were forced into it. An alternate way could also be to approach energy transition from a climate perspective by adhering to the Paris Agreement principles. Pakistan did make diplomatic strides through COP27. I think we did make a big name for ourselves when we built a strong case for our climate vulnerability in the aftermath of 2022 floods. Our fervent diplomacy led to the making of the Loss and Damage Fund. However, that pace has not been kept, but it needs to. First, the people of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan have already made up their minds and decided on a renewable energy course. And second, diversifying energy sources and reducing the dependence on fossil fuels can enhance energy security and reduce the risks of price volatility. It can further contribute to reduction in carbon emissions. And finally, it can create new job opportunities and stimulate local economies. Now, I'm going to put in a few of my questions or issues related to this sort of new paradigm for maybe an old paradigm for all of you, but for me, who has been watching the fossil fuel, energy diplomacy and a major critique of it, this is perhaps for me a new paradigm. So I wanted to raise some of the issues where I need to be schooled by all of you, the experts and the civil society sitting here. So the first is like for this energy diplomacy, as in the energy transition diplomacy, we probably need a clear discourse. So my question is, should it be framed in the larger climate justice and the climate change ideology, or should this be in itself a discourse in itself? So I think moving forward, we really need, for us to move forward, we need to really present it in a more coherent way. The second is that how should this diplomacy be aligned globally? Now, the forums that I have attended, the Fossil Free Forum for Parliamentarians, and I'll talk about that later, it's framed in a South-South cooperation. And here also I sense a certain Asia solidarity, and the debate is around North and South. So the question is, should this diplomacy be South versus North, and the kind of debate that we are hearing here, or should it be solidarity across continents, across countries, and not just restricted to South, South, North, North? One other question that I want to put, in fact, I want to propose, I feel that in all this, the diplomacy around energy, a missing link is really the parliament. And I think that on the one hand, say, we saw this big, the COP30 is this big global gathering of climate diplomacy. But in that, on the one hand, we have the government, which is negotiating. On the other hand, there is the civil society. So they are both taking, extreme positions and meeting in the middle. Where is the parliament placed? And that's where I want to put this question before all of you. I think that the parliament can play a very important missing link when we talk about either the energy transition diplomacy or the climate diplomacy. So this is something that we could really, and then I do want to mention that our energy forum, we were able to, link up with the Asia, the Fossil Free Future, Parliamentarians for Fossil Free Future, which is one example of a global forum for parliamentarians, but I don't know many. And like people like us, there's no space for us in places like COP. So I think this is something that the civil society and the government could work at in engaging the parliamentarians who can be a niche for this, energy transition diplomacy going forward. Because we have 2 or 3 major advantages. First of all, we connect the national with the local, so we are representatives. So the grassroots approach is there. We always know what's going on we have the oversight role, and of course we look at the national budgets. So there was a lot of talk about the budgets and the debt and around the energy diplomacy, because that is the key question of negotiation in the COP. And that is where, again, the parliaments can play a role in at least looking at the national budgets around energy transition and so on. So this could be one thing for you to engage with. So finally, to conclude, the direction of energy consumption has been set by the people, but the story of Pakistan's energy diplomacy is still being written. It is a story of navigating between the promise of connection and the perils of entanglement, between the urgent need for power and the enduring need for sovereignty and economic security. The best way forward is to choose our sovereignty and our strategic autonomy. And I think that energy transition offers the best way forward. Thank you.
will send you the questions through email, Dr. Saab. And we will follow up so that you answer those. So we are left with only one speaker. I was going to talk about the two statements. Now I have to talk about only one statement. Nevertheless, I think we have two very strong statements with two very different styles. Since Minister Saab is not here, so I'll park his questions for another event, for another occasion, but I will request Dr. Nafisa Shah to respond to a couple of questions that I particularly have for her, and then I'll request all of you to ask her any questions that you have. The first question that I want to ask is that you have been involved in various discussions and various debates about the indicative generation capacity expansion plan, which is the foremost document for the power sector for the next 10 years. Similarly, you have also taken part in discussions over Pakistan's nationally determined contributions. So what stands out for you in these two documents as far as Parliament's role is concerned?
Okay. First of all, the Minister for Climate Change is not here, but I really appreciated his position on demolishing the established systems. But unfortunately, if you look at the policy, and my question would have been that he's also a member of the cabinet. But when it comes to policy, the IGCEP is more of the same story that we really want to demolish. It is again undermining the renewables. It's giving a huge place to the nuclear, and generally the same old story that I critiqued, the fossil fuel story, the big picture, the big agreements, the big projects, and undermining the small stories, what could give people relief, and whatever logic was presented, which was fine and very good, and I agree with that. But the story of IGCEP is the same. Now, our parliament, sadly enough, is still distanced. I mean, apart from our forum where we have these conversations, the committees are really concerned. As I said, the parliamentarian has the urgency to respond to the public. So the parliamentarians in the Energy Committee are concerned with कि ये transformer टूट गया है, इसको बढ़ाना है, नए transformers चाहिए, the same grid. Outside that, there's very little thinking in the parliament. We in the forum are doing it. And interestingly enough, I don't think that the main committee on energy has had a hearing on IGCEP. We are going to write to them to have it. But for us too, it was an eye-opener to see that despite whatever is going on in this country, the IGCEP continued to sort of rattle on with the same issue. And there was a lot of disillusionment, especially from the renewable sector, although they have given a good component of it to the hydro, but then the hydro is again Bhasha. And I don't think that this particular group here also knows the dangers of large dam projects and how unrealistic they are in today's time and age. So the IGCEP is still a very unrealistic, wieldy document. And this is something that we recognize and we raise through our forum. But again, Parliament as a whole, and that's why I said that that's a space that all of you must engage with so that we are really schooled into what's going on in the mainstream, which is again more of the same story that the minister wanted to demolish.
Two documents, IGCEP and NDC, because these are both very closely linked to the energy transition in Pakistan. But the other thing that I wanted you to focus on is that we have talked a lot about solar revolution or solar rush or solar boom in Pakistan, and that has happened in spite of the government, not because of the government. And we've been talking about people needing these solar panels, and you've been telling me since 2020 that whenever you go back into your constituency, this is one of the main demands that people have been making. So why does policy lag people's demands and people's requirements so much in Pakistan? You've been in the government and you've been in the opposition, and now you're half in the government and half in the opposition. So how do you think that this does not work out well for ordinary Pakistanis because they have requirements and demands that look into the future, while the policy looks only either at the past or at best at the present. How do we bridge that gap, and how can Parliament help in that process?
I don't know. I think as far as the government's policy is concerned, there's a lot of denial. So they cannot stop the people from acquiring solar because they're not giving resources for the main energy. So I can talk about my constituency. In my constituency, in one tehsil out of 11 union councils, 5 union councils are without power since 2 years. There are villages that are without power since 10 years. What do the people do? So this is not, whatever we may say about this being a people's voluntary choice, it is actually something that people were forced into. But now with all these solars there on our rooftops, how is the government aligning its policy to where the people are here and we are here, and how are they doing it? And I don't know if I see that. One very interesting development is that they're not even formalizing the grid, like, you know, the grid that is now so far away from the people. So this time we get our constituency development funds, and this time I gave a big chunk of constituency development funds for transformers because people need them, you know, they needed to update them. And the government has refused as a matter of policy not to give additional transformers. Now, in my area, post floods, what they call the 11 kV line, that 11 kV line has been stolen because they don't deliver the electricity to the people. And I've been clamoring since years that please restore the electricity, but the distribution companies do not do it. So the infrastructure, the formal infrastructure, at least in our areas, has all but collapsed. So the solar is the only option that people have. But what the government is, I think, looking this way. I mean, I don't know what, I'm looking to you to tell us how the two stories should meet, where the government is and where the people are. And that is where perhaps, you know, the way forward, we'll come to the way forward when we are able to answer this question. Right now, the government is, you know, again, the minister could have had the answer, and I'm sure the minister, Laghari Saab, is doing his best to try and, you know, bridge the two different stories, where the people of Pakistan are and where this, and of course, where the private investment wants to go is they want to follow the way where people are. I mean, there is a lot of small investors ready to invest in the wind corridor, but the government needs to create that space. And is it creating that space? I'm not sure. So there is clearly a mismatch still within policy. And I still wait to be told how we can bridge that divide.
Thank you. I'll not ask any further questions from the stage and invite all of you to ask any questions that you have. We're not going to the Slido for this session so that we can have a lively in-person debate about that. So we'll start with Zubair over there.
Yeah, thank you. I am Zubair Torwali from Bahrain, Swat. As you mentioned, IGCEP, and you mentioned Bhasha, the larger dams. So in the current IGCEP, I saw a few projects in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa were excluded from that plan, but the reasons were given as costly or cost efficiency, but not any particular reasons for the community concerns who are affected by these projects. You mentioned Bhasha, and I particularly mentioned the Swat Cascade project, the multi-millions project by World Bank. The other thing is that the other is a question. As some of these projects were excluded from that plan, does it affect the funder? I mean, the agency which funds these projects. So exclusion from IGCEP, does it affect the any impact the funder? Can it stop the funding of the project?
Yeah, so the question is that the funds for these projects are coming from multilateral development banks like the World Bank and ADB. So if IGCEP has excluded these projects, So will ADB and WB will also cancel those funding? Do you have any?
I'm not an expert on IGCEP. I only know I only know that, as I said, the renewables were ignored. That's all I know. And I know that although the water, the hydro was given a good space, but again, large dams. And then the third component of it was the wind corridor was not given enough importance. And the other thing that a lot of people were questioning is on the C5. So that took a lot of space. But I don't know in terms of how formal a document it is, whether it is followed by the book, whether there is flexibility. I think it still has to be adopted by NEPRA. One of the things that we are calling for is that IGCEP should be a public document, that it should be debated, that there should be, in fact, I'm working on a policy where it could become formally a part of the parliament, to at least to be able to be. And so for me, the biggest question is, why should NEPRA, which is a technical body, be the approval authority for IGCEP? This IGCEP is going to affect our energy security for the next 10 years. It is going to affect how, the pattern of payments. It's going to really impact upon the electricity bills. So the question for us is more on the transparency issue, how Parliament should be involved, and taking it out from the technical, the technical structure out into the public structure. So that is where we are doing the advocacy. But in terms of your question on it being followed to the book, I don't know if it's been approved as yet. So once it gets approved, then.
Yes, I think it's still in the approval process. The next question from the gentleman over there. We'll come back to you. I'll get back.
शाहिद शफी सियाल जी, जनरल मैनेजर एनजीसी, फॉर्मरली एनटीडीसी। मेरा आपसे ये सवाल है कि जो सियासतदान होते हैं उनकी कुछ मजबूरियां होती हैं, उनके टर्म लिमिटेड होती है और उसी के अंदर उन्होंने परफॉर्म करना होता है, रिजल्ट शो करने होते हैं, जिसकी वजह से जो डिसीजन मेकिंग है वो फ्लॉड होती है और क्लोज डोर 15 मिनट्स के अंदर अरबों खरबों के प्रोजेक्ट्स के डिसीजन हो जाते हैं। प्रीवियसली ये डिसीजन इंजीनियर्स करते थे, वापडा करता था, लेकिन अब सिचुएशन चेंज हो गई है। तो ये जो पैराडाइम शिफ्ट आई है, जिसकी वजह से ये कैपेसिटी पेमेंट्स और ये इश्यूज क्रिएट हुए हैं, तो इसके आगे कैसे आप बांधेंगे और इसके अंदर ये शिफ्ट कैसे लाएंगे?
देखिए,
हमारा तो ख्याल है कि शायद प्रॉब्लम दूसरे लोगों ने क्रिएट किया, बट आई लेट हर आंसर योर क्वेश्चन।
देखिए, ये फोरम हमने इसीलिए बनाया है, जैसे मैं कहती हूँ कि ये एक सब्जेक्ट ऐसा है एनर्जी का कि ये एक बंद कमरे में एक बहुत टेक्निकल फिगर्स ये वो और सियासतदान हम हाउ डू वी अंडरस्टैंड दिस इशू? वी अंडरस्टैंड इट जब लोड शेडिंग होती है, वी अंडरस्टैंड इट जब ट्रांसफार्मर चला जाता है, वी अंडरस्टैंड इट जब 11 kV लाइन चोरी हो जाती है। दैट्स हाउ वी परसीव इट। नाउ फॉर ऑल द वेरियस wheels within wheels is something, this is one of the reasons why we made this forum. But I also, as a parliamentarian, I have witnessed, I remember very well जब CPEC, as I said, जब नवाज शरीफ साहब उठकर उन्होंने चाइना पाकिस्तान एनर्जी कॉरिडोर का जो नाम लिया, फॉर मी पोइट्री। आई थॉट कि ये मुल्क जो है एक ऐसा कॉरिडोर बनेगा जिसमें मजे मजे के प्रोजेक्ट्स होंगे, इकोनॉमिक हब होगा, ये होगा वो होगा, लेकिन उसके बाद उन्होंने क्या किया? दैट स्टोरी वी ऑल नो। So you're right, it is about the impulsive nature of Pakistan's politics, that you have to show delivery in a physical sense. But I also think that more than that, it's an issue of transparency. That's where Parliament comes in. Us waqt bhi I remember har committee meeting mein I used to ask, ये बड़ा जो थैला है जिसमें आपने ये पावर प्रोजेक्ट्स रखे हैं, ये CPEC इसमें है क्या? हमें बताएं ये क्या है ये प्रोजेक्ट्स? ये साहिवाल कोल पावर प्लांट क्या है, हमें बताएं। ये जो एक ट्रेन जा रही है लाहौर में 24 किलोमीटर जिससे हम फॉरेन लोन्स ले रहे हैं, ये क्या है? We used to ask, and at least I used to ask. We used to ask those questions. But the major issue with all these things is transparency. And that is something, and also involving the parliament in oversight, which is something that I as a parliamentarian, मेरा यही activism होता है कि हम parliament में अपना space reclaim करें, जो हमने seat किया है। इस वक्त भी parliament जो है, जो सबसे बड़ा मेरा अपना गिला हमारे पार्लियामेंट के साथ है कि गवर्नमेंट कहती है ये ऐसा करो तो पार्लियामेंट उठ के ऐसा करती है. But in terms of when we have a parliament that is truly an oversight body, that is slightly independent as a legislature, that is when we will be able to stop things. We still do it. I'm not saying कि बिल्कुल ही rubber stamp है. पार्लियामेंट बहुत कुछ करती है. इस वक्त फाइनेंस कमेटी को अगर आप देखें तो बहुत कुछ कर रही है. I'm not sure about the energy committee. So वो भी जरूर questions कर रहे होंगे. लेकिन the parliament needs to stand up and ask for transparency in everything, budgeting, costing, processes. हमारे पास पर्स है. Why do we approve? Why do we allow? And that IGSEP का सारा डिबेट यही है कि पार्लियामेंट में कहीं करीब से भी नहीं गुजर के ये गया. So we are calling for that. We had this hearing on that, and we are now going to say, I'm going to put in a private member's bill where I say that this is one of the most significant document which is going to determine how people will pay their bills. कि 60 रुपए per unit होगा या 25 रुपए होगा, ये determine IGSEP करेगा. So we should have that kind of, you know, it being laid in the parliament. So I think one of the failures was कि हमारी, you know, पार्लियामेंट जो है उसको ओवरसाइट रोल अपना अदा करना चाहिए जिस तरीके से वो शायद हम नहीं कर पाए. But we have to continue to ask these questions.
So the difference between the government and the parliament is that the parliament sits, listens to you, responds to you. The government often gives its lecture and goes away. And I don't want to mention any names here. I'll request Leela Ram to ask a question, and then a couple of other questions. I'll also encourage women in the house, in the room, to ask questions. Leela Ram first.
थैंक यू वेरी मच सर. मेरा ताल्लुक थरपारकर से है, जहाँ पे जो है ना वो एक बात चली कि सीपेक के जो है ना वो बड़े बड़े प्रोजेक्ट चल रहे हैं, और एक हमें वहाँ पे नारा जो है ना वो सुनने में आता है कि थर बदलेगा पाकिस्तान. मगर बदकिस्मती ये है कि बीइंग एन रेजिडेंट, और मैडम नफीसा शाह वहाँ पे आपकी ही गवर्नमेंट है, और तकरीबन 10 गवर्नमेंट वहाँ पे आपकी रही है. मगर 2016 से लेकर आज तक जो हम कर रहे हैं बीइंग मार्जिनलाइज्ड कम्युनिटी कि हमारे जो फंडामेंटल राइट्स हैं उनकी वायलेशन हो रही है, वो चाहे एनवायरमेंट में हो, ये कम्युनिटी की सूरत में हो. आज तक जो है सिंध गवर्नमेंट ने ये इश्यूज जो है रेड्यूस नहीं किए, और इस पर सिंध से उनसे हमारी बातचीत कर सकते हैं कि हमारे इश्यूज हो सके.
कि ये तो सिंध गवर्नमेंट का मामला है. यू वुड अंडरस्टैंड कि उनको करीब से ये चीज देखनी होगी कि आपके क्या इश्यूज है. मैं बताती हूँ, जब मैं नाज़िम थी 2001 में, तो मुझे सबसे पहले जो इशू जिसने आके मुझे हिट किया वो प्रोटेस्टर्स आ गए, ऐसे आप ही की तरह. कहाँ से आया? हमारा एक गैस प्रोस्पेक्टिंग रीजन है नारा, और नारे को लोग सिर्फ यही देखते हैं कि यहाँ से गैस निकलता है, यानी कि वहाँ लोग नहीं है, यहाँ गैस निकलता है. यहाँ पूरा, you know that it's close to the Jaisalmer area, it's a part of this whole Thar Rajasthan desert, and it is the site where all the prospecting agencies are there and all the drilling is taking place. So वहाँ से बहुत बड़े ज़खायर निकले थे. लेकिन जब वो निकले थे तो वहाँ की गैस कंपनीज जो हैं उन्होंने लोगों को तो देखा ही नहीं, वो शुरू हो गई. तो लोगों ने प्रोटेस्ट किया, मैंने उनको ज्वाइन कर लिया प्रोटेस्ट में. और वो दिन और आज का दिन, उसके बाद मूवमेंट चल के आज आपकी जो एजेंसीज हैं जो भी हमारे इलाकों में हैं, दे हैव टू स्पेंड अ मिनिमम अमाउंट ऑन द पीपल. नाउ यू नो दैट एक प्रोडक्शन बोनस फंड्स हैं जो करोड़ों रुपए के वो पब्लिक पर खर्च होते हैं, उनमें MNAs MPs बैठते हैं, और सोशल वेलफेयर भी स्कीम्स हैं. सो कुछ चेंज तो हुआ है इस एक्टिविज्म से, और वो फंड्स आपके थरकोल में भी CSR हो. Now we are moving one step forward. I have again submitted a bill to formalize the CSR spendings, because बहुत सारी large companies CSR communities पर नहीं खर्च करती. Now that अभी government मेरी बात नहीं मान रही, मैंने तो कहा है mandatory 1% खर्च करें companies, अभी वो नहीं मान रहे. Maybe we'll come to a middle way. लेकिन as far as I know, all these companies, petroleum companies, coal mining companies, all of them have to spend a significant portion of their profits on the community, and I know that they are spending even in Thar. अब मुझे details नहीं पता, वो the Sindh government would know all that.
There's a question from that side. All the questions that are asked by this side. It's from that side.
Assalamu alaikum, madam.
No, I'm enjoying myself.
This is Dr.
It's
Nayyar.
good learning for me also.
This is Dr. Nayyar Hussain. I'm associate professor at Mehran University, Jamshoro. You have rightly spoken about various government level initiatives which were related to fossil fuels like Type P, CASA, our pipeline project, even CPEG. Some of these projects have been your initiative, your government's initiative as well. But one of the best projects we have witnessed in the Sindh province, where your political party is heading, that's the solarization. And we have witnessed a lot of government buildings, rooftops, provided, facilitated with solar rooftops. That's excellent model. Even Punjab government is also implementing it. But one of the key bottleneck, which I have witnessed, I've been part of that project, is their operationalization, maintenance. So I feel as a parliamentarian and as a representative of people, you should also emphasize on the capacity building. Capacity building regarding people, masses, and even the organization, so that this adoption of solar rush adoption is appropriately taken for. It should not go waste. What I can refer you, various buildings across Hyderabad, for example, civil hospital, Shahbaz building, they are solarized, but majority of them are not operating. So we need to develop capacity. We do not need to install the panels alone or inverters alone. We need to develop capacity. There are programs in place, but their monitoring, evaluation, and oversight is very important beyond just policy making and their vocal representation at different forum. This is my one suggestion.
मेरा भी यही था, जैसे आपने कहा ना कि लोग इस इधर खड़े हुए हैं, they've got all their solar rooftops, they've got everything, और government इधर है. And now how do we make a policy that really, gets there and then gives people whatever are the missing links? One thing that I'm very interested in, जैसे मैंने कहा, मेरी 6-7 यूनियन काउंसिल्स में बिजली नहीं है और कोई होप नहीं है. हालांकि मैं लड़ के अभी मैंने कमेटी में इनको डाला है कि मैं इनको बुलाऊं सेप्को के चीफ को, लेकिन कोई उम्मीद नहीं है. तो मैं ये सोच रही हूँ कि आप लोग आए, जैसे हमने सोलर रूफटॉप लोगों ने लगा लिया, तो आए, लेट्स लुक एट द माइक्रोग्रिड्स बनाए. हम लोग वही जो मुसद्दिक साहब कह रहे थे कि डिमोलिश करो, तो इसको डिमोलिश अगर करना है, ये जो जिसके लिए हम खाली पैसे दे रहे हैं कि वो हम कैपेसिटी पेमेंट्स करें, उसके बिल्स आ रहे हैं. लोग तो बिजली खर्च नहीं कर रहे हैं, अब बहुत कम कर रहे हैं. और अभी तो ज्यादा दर्दनाक तो ये हुआ कि इंडस्ट्री को भी उन्होंने कैप्टिव पावर प्लांट से निकाला है. वन ऑफ द मोस्ट पेनफुल स्टोरीज, आई डोंट नो हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू हैव फॉलोड दैट, the industry was forced to abandon their captive power plants. कह रहे हैं कि ये IMF की वजह से कि ये तो आपको सब्सिडी है क्योंकि आपने अपने पैसों से प्लांट्स लगाए हैं, लेकिन अब वो गवर्नमेंट कह रही है कि नहीं, ये गैस हम आपको नहीं देंगे, आप हमारी महंगी बिजली इस्तेमाल करें. दिस इज सो पेनफुल. आपकी कैसे इंडस्ट्री चलेगी? तो इसलिए वी हैव टू नाउ, अगर पाकिस्तानी पब्लिक अपनी एक स्टोरी लिख रहे हैं रिन्यूएबल्स की, तो अब उसको हम लोग, आप लोग इंजीनियर्स, हमें माइक्रोग्रिड्स की तरफ लेके जाएं कि हम उसको एक स्टेबिलिटी दें और इसको एक चैप्टर, क्योंकि दुनिया भर में पाकिस्तान का एग्जांपल हम पॉजिटिवली साइट कर रहे हैं कि हमने देखिए इतना कारनामा किया. तो ये गवर्नमेंट का बाय डिफॉल्ट, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट काम नहीं दे रही थी, डिलीवर नहीं कर रही थी, तो लोगों ने अपना एक बना लिया. तो अब उसको नेक्स्ट लेवल पर कैसे लेके जाना है, maybe that will be the second phase of what the people of Pakistan can do or should do. Thank you.
People still want to ask more questions.
Okay, thank
so
you.
I'm allowing.
No,
so Fizan.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, madam. Thank you for your enlightening discussion. Regarding the IGSEP, Dr. Saab, I would also like to seek attention of Dr. Saab. So regarding the IGSEP, madam, a lot of things are negative in that, but a lot of positives are also there, in the sense that me and Dr. Saab was in a Prime Minister's committee together, and where we initially only 2,000 megawatt of solar was in the IGSEP, and then we included around 8,000 megawatt of solar by removing the conventional around 7,500 megawatt of solar of other conventional power plants, regular thermal power plants, and then we excluded those and included the 8,000 megawatt of solar. So where as far as the hydel are concerned, there were some constraints. Of course, at some of the power plants, the construction had already been initiated. So the जिसको कहते हैं कि तीर कमान से निकल चुका था, so that had to be included. We couldn't reverse, unfortunately, those. So this was regarding the IGCEP. So basically the policy question which I would like to put forward to you is that now what we are seeing is that there are some fault lines being developed, at the provincial level and the federal level, and those fault lines are that we have an existing grid, we have an existing regulator, so much so that we want to dispatch all these power plants unified. We're also insisting KE to come into this unified dispatch. But then on the other hand, what we're seeing is that the provinces, especially Sindh, is setting up its own regulator. It has its own transmission company. And now they're in the process of setting up their own generators and all. They're also setting up their own nizam of or a system of energy as well. So at one stage or at one time, what we're saying is these all transmission and all these things will go redundant. On the other hand, what we're seeing is that all these provinces, whether Punjab, whether KP, or whether Sindh, they're all setting up their own regulators, they're all setting up their own transmission companies and own distribution companies, and looking forward to come into the domain of all these things. So I would seek your comments on this, that how do you see being an important part of Sindh government?
देखिए मुझे अभी अगेन सिंध की डिटेल नहीं पता, लेकिन मुझे ये पता है कि क्योंकि एनर्जी क्राइसिस इतना क्रॉनिक है, जैसे मैंने कहा मैं तो 90s से देखती आ रही हूँ, तो जब तक इसमें होल ऑफ पाकिस्तान अप्रोच नहीं होगी, लेकिन होल ऑफ पाकिस्तान अप्रोच में भी जहां सूबे पहुंचना चाह रहे हैं या जो कुछ करना चाह रहे हैं, तो वफाक उनको साथ लेकर चले. लेकिन ये देखिए ना, कैप्टिव पावर प्लांट्स का एग्जाम्पल आपके सामने है, एक्सपोर्ट प्रोसेसिंग जोन्स का आपका एग्जाम्पल आपके सामने है, वो खत्म कर रहे हैं, स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक जोन्स खत्म कर रहे हैं, कैप्टिव पावर प्लांट्स खत्म कर रहे हैं. ये वफाक की पॉलिसीज हैं. तो लोग कहाँ जाएं? जैसे लोगों ने अपना पाथ किया, फिर सूबे कह रहे हैं हम भी, आप हमें विंड कॉरिडोर, इतना जबरदस्त विंड कॉरिडोर है सिंध का, और सस्ती बिजली, कहते हैं हम 9 रुपए बिजली देने के लिए तैयार हैं, आप उसको इग्नोर कर रहे हैं. तो ये आई मीन it has to be a whole of Pakistan approach. I think all of us have to really work together to come up with a radical overhaul of the existing system. And I think आइन में तो है कि अभी मुझे article I could, yes, वो तो अब electricity is a concurrent subject, so the provinces are well in their lawful authority to do all this.
Last two questions, please keep them brief so that we can finish them. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on IGCEP, I would like to another. Actually, first we need to know.
एक question मैं आप दोनों से पूछूं.
जी.
मुझे बताएं, अगर हम अपने पार्लियामेंट में इस पे बहस करें, ये बताएं
वहीं पे ले जाते हैं.
बिल, लोगों का बिल कितना कम होगा as a result of them. I am interested कि at the end of the day लोग per unit कितना cost pay करेंगे अगर ये सारे projects material है, including the C5, including the Bhasha.
Yes, first we need to understand what what the constitution is, then what the electricity policy is, which is approved by the cabinet, federal cabinet. Then there is an electricity plan. So then there is a grid code. So all these documents are governing documents to prepare an integrated system plan, and IGCEP is part of that plan. So unless and until the principle in the electricity policy and plan is that it has to be least cost energy planning. So when we talk about solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, they don't mean anything. It's all either the production cost of the next electricity unit, is it cheaper or not? That's the principle.
Exactly.
So no project can govern that process because that would be against all these documentation that I mentioned. So the principle has to be followed. If nuclear fits, well and good. If solar fits, well and good. If they don't fit into that principle, so technology will not govern the process. Every technology has to fit into the process. So that's the principle. So we should not be, sort of biased towards any technology. It's the service that they provide and when they provide. So the other thing what we have been missing is the demand side. So we do not even talk about, everyone talks about supply solution. So maybe it's better for the projects, the people invest, some internal rate of return. So we can curtail this demand, which is all due to building related. We are not using this electric, and plus we have already made so many decisions that now to fit in any other cheaper technology is more counterproductive. So we need to do away with some of the earlier decisions and consume that. So the focus has to be towards the creating demand and reducing wastage and reducing our peak demand. So those should be our focus when we talk about at the parliament level or at any level. So those should be our focuses. It should not be technology driven. We need to be aware of those technologies, but how do they play a role in providing that service which is required from them? That's what they need to be looked at. Thank you.
you.
Did all the
I think we
projects
are
that-
running
but
out
just
of
a
time.
question कि ये
uh,
honestly आप बताएंगे कि जो भी projects included है वो least cost principle को follow कर रहे हैं, including the C5 and the Bhasha and all that. I'm not sure.
If the process is, if some project does not fit into that criteria, the sponsor has to provide that, additional funds. But it's a based on least cost planning.
But the real problem with hydro is that there are external costs that are never measured, that are never included. For instance, if you build a dam up in the north, the cost incurred on the south in mangroves that are in the Indus Delta and the farmland that is Indus Delta. I do not want to get into a great debate here. This is a debate.
Cost violate the
So
least
that cost is not even mentioned in the external cost of any dam. So let's not go into that debate. It's a large debate. We can have another session for that.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time.
I
We'll have just two questions.
I just want to add one comment.
1 minute.
Just 1 minute.
Yeah.
So, madam, IGCEP is a generation planning, right? How are we planning for that generation depends on the forecasting, right? So if our forecasting is incorrect, which is mainly incorrect, right? So if we are forecasting for more energy, so we will always end up more over procurement, and that is the case.
It's still the case.
So the main issue is the forecasting.
मेरे 4 gigabytes तो लोगों ने ले लिए हैं already.
Yeah. This is
तो
the main
आपने
issue.
6 gigabytes produce
आप सवाल कीजिएगा फिर आखिरी सवाल यहाँ से.
Thank you very much for coming to LAMS. A great conversation. I want to highlight an issue. It is related to financing. Pakistan has become the largest importer of solar panel in the world. In last year, we have imported around 16 gigawatt panel. So that panel has arrived in Pakistan. One blessing in disguise is that tier 1 panel, it was meant for America and Europe, but they imposed anti-dumping duty and Pakistan was in solar boom and rush and we have imported all that. So the other catalyst in the solar boom was that State Bank finance. State Bank was financing green finance at very nominal, around 6% loan.
I'm sorry,
2%.
really sorry.
Stop that loan.
आप मेरी बात
Can you recommend that the State Bank
इंटेलिजेंस से नहीं बनता है, ये सवाल स्टेट बैंक से बनता है, ये हुकूमत से
लेकिन
बनता है.
ये जरूर कहते
Catch
हैं
up
हमें
with the minister and
में
ask him.
एक चीज से हमारे बजट सबसे बड़ा झगड़ा जो हमारा कमेटी में हुआ था इस टैक्स पर हुआ था. मतलब कितनी लोगों की आप सोचे डिमांड होगी. Not just of course the lobby itself कि सोलर वाली लॉबी अपनी जगह, लेकिन आम पब्लिक जो है उनकी इतनी डिमांड थी कि सारी चीजें एक तरफ, इतना हेवी टैक्सेशन था, हर चीज थी, लेकिन हम लोग सोलर पर अड़े रहे कि वो टैक्स कम करें, और वो फिर शायद 17% से लेकर 10% तक आया।
आई एम रियली सॉरी, बट ये जो SBP की स्कीम्स हैं या इस तरह की स्कीम्स हैं, वो पार्लियामेंट के मैंडेट से अनफॉर्चुनेटली बाहर है। तो हमें इसके लिए या तो गवर्नमेंट से पूछना है या हमें SBP से पूछना है। वी जस्ट हैव वन लास्ट क्वेश्चन. ओके, okay, but please ask a question that is related to policy and not related to the government sector.
Policy is also largely government. हम लोग तो oversight करते हैं.
जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
Very little mandate.
अ,
एक और दे रहे, ठीक है? अच्छा, ठीक है.
मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि हम थर्मल एनर्जी की बात कर रहे हैं, ग्रीन एनर्जी की बात कर रहे हैं, देयर आर वेरियस सोर्सेज, और वो कॉस्ट की बात कर रहे थे। तो व्हाई डोंट वी सेट टारगेट्स कि हम 7 सेंट पे बिजली ले आएंगे, 8 सेंट्स पे ले आएंगे, टू कम्पीट विद ग्लोबल जो प्रैक्टिसेस हैं। वी आर नॉट इन कंपेटिटिव टू द एनर्जी प्राइसेस जो ग्लोबली हैं, वी आर वेरी एक्सपेंसिव। तो आप टारगेट सेट करें कि हमने पार्लियामेंट जो एनर्जी कमेटी के हम लोगों को सस्ती बिजली पर प्रोवाइड करेंगे, इरिस्पेक्टिव सोर्सेज क्या होंगे। वो टारगेट सेट करें 7 सेंट 8 सेंट, दैट्स इट।
वो वजीर साहब ने तो वो बात कर ली ना, लेकिन अब वजीर साहब जो बात कर रहे हैं, अगर यहाँ OS लगारी साहब बैठे होते तो फिर उनका रिस्पॉन्स सुनना था। तो वजीर साहब ने बात सही की कि जो लोग ये कह रहे हैं कि ये एग्जिस्टिंग स्ट्रक्चर तो बिल्कुल नॉन वायबल है, इसको खत्म करें। आई थिंक ही वाज रियली मेकिंग अ वेरी रेडिकल स्टेटमेंट। तो वो तो आप वाली बात है, बट दैट इज फॉर द गवर्नमेंट टू डिसाइड।
Hello, Assalamualaikum. My name is Yasir Hussain. I am the director for the Climate Action Center in Karachi. We've been trying in Karachi to make arrangements so that on the one hand, finance is arranged, and on the other, we can solve the load shedding problem despite having a lot of electricity. So to solarize the problem areas. And I think the same model is the one that you indicated, which is the microgrids and the mini grids. Now, how can we arrange? And I think this is the question I'd like you to take interest in at the parliamentary level, how to arrange the finance, how to arrange the technology, which is all there. In fact, so much of solar is there. So how to coordinate that so that groups of people, whether it's the Union Council, can set up these units. So you see, it's these units which are modular, chote, and it'll add up to something which can be then connected to the grid or not. Lekin agar aap, if you just look at the spread of the population, so it's just a question of having or not having electricity. And it's almost there. So it just needs a little bit of coordination. Aapka kya khayal hai?
Thank you, yes.
Some models, we need to demonstrate some models that will be groundbreaking. और वो है नहीं, जो हमने अभी जो ये पार्लियामेंटेरियंस फॉर फॉसिल फ्री फ्यूचर वालों ने कुछ मॉडल्स हमें दिखाए थे, वो बहुत महंगे थे, माइक्रोग्रिड्स के, नॉट फीजिबल। तो अगर हम डेमोन्स्ट्रेट कर, और लेकिन अब ये जो नई जनरेशन है बैटरीज की, इट्स ऑल अबाउट बैटरीज नाउ। अब जो नई जनरेशन है बैटरीज की, आई बिलीव दे आर गोइंग टू बी मच मच चीपर। तो जब कोई एक वायबल मॉडल्स माइक्रोग्रिड के आए, आई एम रेडी। मेरे पास तो बिजली है नहीं हमारे हलकों में, कोई भी इंजीनियर्स आके मुझे फीजिबिलिटी बना के दे। मैं तो ये कह रही हूँ कि मेरे कंस्टिट्यूंसी डेवलपमेंट फंड्स भी मैं देने के लिए तैयार हूँ, अगर कोई ऐसा मॉडल कोई लेके आता है कि 1-2-3 करोड़ में कोई माइक्रोग्रिड बन जाती है। But those models have to be made, and I wish that all of you come up with, because this is what we really now need. This is the second stage that we need to get at. Yes, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Nafisa Shah. You've been very patient and you have the bandwidth to answer all the questions that were not even relevant to you. And we're very, very grateful for your time and your understanding and knowledge that you shared with us. And we keep looking forward to having you in such forums where we can discuss all these things in the candid and honest manner that we had here.
I just want to also add that here, there's a lot of knowledge here. You know, as I said, parliamentarians are laypersons.
Yeah.
So please do advise us on what kind of steps, regulatory, any gaps that we can, fill, any questions that we can ask, because that is the forum's work. We want to be your voice, and we want to take it to that level where we move towards solutions. So do give us your inputs, and maybe Pride can be the bridge.
Thank
There's
you.
anything that you want to reach to the parliament, there's
Yeah.
that.
Kindly have your seat there. We will later call you again here for a group photo. I think we must clap for her and give her a standing ovation. Thank you. Thanks again. I was supposed to conclude this 2-day conference in like 15 or 20 minutes. Since we are already running short of time, I'll only give you 2 bits of thought to conclude this entire conference. One is a couplet from Ghalib, and the other is an anecdote from my own village. I'll first give you the anecdote from my village. In 1997, people in my village, when the elections approached, they demanded from the electoral candidates that we need telephones. We need access to telephone. So the government came into power, and the first thing that we had in our village was a telephone exchange setup in 1998. By 2002, that telephone exchange had become unnecessary, unneeded, because everyone had gone on to mobile phone. But even after having gone defunct in 2002, the building the government that built is still there. The machinery that the government installed there is still resting there and being stolen in bits and pieces. 3 people that government employed in that telephone exchange are still getting salary from the people's revenue. So that is exactly what is going to happen in the electricity sector very soon. Whether we have a plan or whether we have not a plan, because we can't fight technology. Technology has taken over. Every idea, every plan, every consideration, every principle that we have has been taken over by technology. And technology of solar was around since 1969 or maybe even earlier. But it has become so cheap now that anyone can go to a market and buy a small solar plate and have one bulb switched on and one fan switched on. That's it. They are electrified. Otherwise, our entire grid has been unsuccessful in the last 75 years to provide electricity to at least 25% of Pakistan, if not more. And if you think of reliable energy, I think almost all of Pakistan is still unable to have reliable access to energy. So that's one. The second is, Ghalib said that कतरे में दजला दिखाई न दे और जुज़ में कुल, कतरे में दजला दिखाई न दे और जुज़ में कुल, खेल बच्चों का हुआ दीदा बीना न हुआ. So this conference was an attempt to show you a river in a droplet. So if we have not been successful in that, it was all child's play. I'm translating the couplet as well when I'm saying this. So if we have done that successfully, and you've seen the whole river in the droplet that we have discussed here, of course, energy sector and climate sector are so vast that we can discuss them for 365 days in multiple forums, and still there'll be room for more discussion and more debate. But we've tried to, summarize and distill every conversation in a droplet of water to show you the river. If you've seen the river in these 2 days, we've been successful. If you haven't seen the river, please let us know. So when we try again, we fail better. Thank you very much. Should I announce? Yeah. Now I invite Mr. Shahid Hussain, who is Director of Lahore University of Management Sciences, to offer a vote of thanks to all of you. Over to you, Shahid.
Dr. Nafisa Shah, various dignitaries and speakers, both national and international. Assalamu alaikum. The importance of energy transition, especially in the context of Asia, cannot be overemphasized. Investments in sustainable and renewable energy will determine new partnerships and influence the way in which energy transition will be governed. Asia has a pivotal role to play in all of this. A large population, big consumption, and a lot of new energy infrastructure projects. Important policymakers, energy experts, both national and international, have shared their findings and thoughts on this important subject, which should result in shaping informed policy recommendations. We are thankful to our co-organizers for the Asia Energy Transition for choosing our campus for this event. With 5 schools, School of Science and Engineering, School of Business, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, School of Education, and School of Law. LUMS provides the width and depth to work on such critical and complex issues. With more than 30% of our 6,500 student body pursuing their graduate programs, it enables us to lead research and collaborate with international institutions. Our diverse student body from almost 130 cities across Pakistan gives us a unique view on different social and economic needs. Our admissions are based solely on merit, regardless of students' ability to pay for tuition. This, combined with a highly qualified and mission-driven faculty, has created an environment of excellence around the values of diversity, tolerance, and inquiry. With senior academics from leading international institutions of the world advising us on the way forward, LUMS is a progressive university ready to embrace change and be prepared. Almost 8,000 of our alumni are placed internationally, giving us a huge reach in the developed world. I would like to thank everyone for their participation with an invitation to visit us again. Have a great evening and a wonderful flight back home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shahid Hussain. And with that, we come to the closing of our Asia Energy Summit, the 2nd edition. And what we've witnessed here in the 2 days is that the Asian energy transition is arguably the most significant economic and environmental opportunity of our time. And the scale of this continent demands solutions that are equally massive and visionary. On behalf of the organizing committee, the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, and the Alliance for Climate Justice and Clean Energy, as well as the LUMS Energy Institute, I would like to thank all of you for joining us, and we hope to see you in the next year for Asia Summit 3.0. Thank you. Have a nice day. And may I request our panelists, our international guests, to kindly come up on stage for a group picture. Kairos, Sunil.